Chapter 154. Time was up. The South Lord hadn't finished his 8th jug, nor had the North Lord's 9th. Both of them were lying on the ground drunk. Han Yunqing drank a total of 9 jugs and was still standing. Han Yunqing had won. Everyone present was in disbelief, unable to believe what they'd seen with their own eyes. However, the truth was right in front of their eyes. Those who'd been waiting to see Han Yunqing lose, as well as those who didn't care, all had a whole new level of respect for this woman. Too valiant. Truly, they had to hand it to this woman. Princess Changping was stunned as well. She stood there, looking at the red-faced but still haughty Han Yunqing. For some reason, she felt a sense of inferiority. At this time, Murong Wanru bumped into her from behind. Princess Changping recovered her wits and understood that her chance had come. She immediately put on a joyful smile and laughed loudly. I knew my imperial aunt wouldn't lose face for imperial uncle. This wine competition, imperial aunt has won. Everyone believed that Princess Changping was convinced, but no matter how Han Yunqing looked at it, she felt that something wasn't right. In reality, Han Yunqing couldn't even stand properly. She was also drunk, but she still maintained a bit of clarity. She didn't know why Princess Changping had invited the North and South Lords, but she felt that something wasn't right. However, she couldn't put her finger on it. However, seeing how drunk the North and South Lords were, she guessed that the two of them wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Then I'll have to ask Princess Changping to urge the North and South Lords to not forget our bet. Han Yunqing said. Of course. Of course. Princess Changping was especially happy. After confirming that the wine competition was over, Han Yunqing's vigilance and nervousness relaxed. She couldn't help but admit that she'd drunk too much and had already exceeded her limits. She slowly sat down and held her forehead with one hand. At this time, her head was dizzy and her stomach was churning. She wanted to vomit but couldn't. Her strength was slowly disappearing. She was too lazy to move even if she wanted to. She just wanted to lie down and sleep. Han Yunqing was about to ask a servant girl to take her to a side room to rest when Murong Wanru, who had been keeping a low profile, walked over. Sister-in-law, let me help you down to rest. You drank too much. There's no need. Just let the palace maids send me there. Han Yunqing said mildly, forcing herself to look a little more clear-headed. She wouldn't feel at ease letting Murong Wanru take her away at this time. Liangchen, Mei Jing, the two of you send the Princess Consort to her room to rest. Take care of her carefully. As soon as Princess Changping spoke, Liangchen and Mei Jing, the two palace maids, immediately came up to support her. Murong Wanru said hypocritically, Sister-in-law, I'll go with you. No need. You guys can continue. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Han Yunqing really did look very clear-headed, but seeing her drink so much wine, everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before she got drunk. Murong Wanru followed her for a few steps before turning back. She gave Princess Changping a faint smile before returning to her seat. Princess Changping also calmly sat down. She glanced at the North-South Masters lying on the side and lazily said, eunuchly, take the North-South Masters away to sober up. A dignified man actually lost to a woman. How embarrassing. Yes, this old servant obeys, eunuchly replied in a hoarse voice. Very quickly, the banquet continued. Princess Changping seemed to be in a much better mood. She chatted with everyone about anything under the sun, laughing and cursing. It was a lively scene. On the other side of the room, Han Yunqing had the two servant girls withdraw before personally locking the door behind her. Only then did she completely let down her guard. As soon as she relaxed, she fell heavily into a chair and couldn't even stand up. She really drank too much. She really wanted to lie down and sleep, but she knew she couldn't. The fastest and healthiest method was to vomit out all the wine she drank. After resting for a while, she forced her eyelids open. Lying on the side, she used the cruelest method to vomit. She used her finger to press against her tongue. After hesitating for a moment, she dug at her throat. She couldn't take it anymore and vomited. This vomiting was terrible. She hadn't eaten much, so all she vomited was water and wine. She didn't know how many times she dug and how much she vomited. In the end, her 5 viscera and 6 bowels finally felt comfortable and she was much more clear-headed than before. It was just that her entire body was limp and she didn't have any strength. After Han Yunqing rinsed her mouth, she took out some glucose water from her detoxification system to drink to prevent herself from collapsing. Although she was a poison doctor, her detoxification system's medicine storehouse had prepared many emergency medicines. Anyone who had gotten drunk before knew that even after vomiting and drinking glucose water, one would need to sleep for at least a few hours to recover their strength. Han Yunqing returned to the bed with difficulty and almost fell down. She didn't have any more strength to move her position. She fell asleep in the same position as when she fell down. The room was silent. However, not long after, there was movement from the tightly shut door. The creaking sound got louder and louder. This was obviously someone trying to pry open the door. On the bed, Han Yunqing didn't have any strength in her body. She was unconscious and didn't hear any movement at all. Very soon, with a clang sound, the door was locked and the door was carefully pushed open by someone outside. She only heard a series of whispers. Han Yunqing focused and immediately understood what was going on. This guy had been drugged with an aphrodisiac. Although an aphrodisiac was called a medicine, it was actually a kind of poison. A poison that harmed people. Didn't she lock the door? How did this guy get in? Han Yunqing looked towards the door and found that the door bolt had been pried open. She instantly sucked in a cold breath and immediately understood that this was a conspiracy. Zhang Sun-che must have been drugged before being thrown in. Prying open the door with such a big commotion, were the servant girls and guards all dead? They didn't notice. This must have been done by Princess Changping. Despicable. No, it was simply disgusting. She actually used such a despicable and dirty method. Han Yunqing was still fuming. Who knew that Zhang Sun-che suddenly flipped over and reached out a lewd claw towards her? Little lady, don't dodge. This lord guarantees that you'll feel very good. Han Yunqing dodged his arm, but Zhang Sun-che's other hand immediately reached over and grabbed her sleeve. He suddenly pulled her close and sucked in a deep breath. Following which, his leg was about to cross over. Han Yunqing was scared out of her wits. She didn't have the strength to break free or dodge. She didn't think much and took out a golden needle from the detoxification system as a weapon. Using all her strength, she stabbed towards Zhang Sun-che's inner thigh. Ah! Zhang Sun-che groaned and rolled to the side in pain. At this time, his drunkenness had sobered up a little. Only, under the interaction of the drug and alcohol, he had long lost his rationality. His lust was unbearable and he couldn't wait to take this woman. Stinky woman. He roared angrily and pounced over again. Han Yunqing wanted to escape, but she was really too weak. When she turned over, she accidentally fell off the bed. But who knew that Zhang Sun-che actually grabbed her arm and wouldn't let go? His other hand reached over in a wretched manner. Scram! Han Yunqing shouted angrily and stabbed the golden needle again. But she really didn't have the strength. This time, to Zhang Sun-che, it didn't hurt or itch at all. Zhang Sun-che suddenly pulled and tore her sleeve. This tug actually released Han Yunqing. Han Yunqing threw herself to the side and finally put some distance between Zhang Sun-che and herself. She let out a long sigh. Only then did she realize that she could poison and detoxify. Damn it! Was she scared out of her wits? She couldn't wait to poison this damn thing to death, but she still held it in. Since Princess Changping had drugged him, there had to be a next step. Nothing could happen to Zhang Sun-che. At this time, Zhang Sun-che climbed off the bed and pressed towards Han Yunqing again. The aphrodisiac he had been drugged with was very common. Han Yunqing knew how to detoxify it with a single scan. She held the golden needle in her hand and aimed it at the acupuncture point on Zhang Sun-che's abdomen. 2 needles and the aphrodisiac would be detoxified. She trembled as she watched Zhang Sun-che approach. She didn't have much strength, so she could only strike when Zhang Sun-che was close. Her palms were sweating. She had never been so nervous in her life. One had to know that if she made a mistake, she would be finished. Chapter 155. Han Yunqing held the gold needles tightly, watching Zhang Sun-che approach step by step. She was so nervous that she held her breath. This moment would determine life and death. Hee hee, little lady, let's see where you can run off to. Zhang Sun-che smiled lecherously, grabbing Han Yunqing's ankle. Han Yunqing instantly quivered. She had to endure. Who knew that Zhang Sun-che didn't continue to approach, but instead pulled her down and pressed her down. In the nick of time, she aimed for an acupoint on Zhang Sun-che's abdomen and immediately inserted 2 needles. In an instant, Zhang Sun-che's body that was pressing down suddenly stopped. He seemed to have been stimulated by something and froze. At the same time, Han Yunqing abruptly rolled away from him to one side. By the time she stopped, Zhang Sun-che had already lost all strength and collapsed to the ground. Just a little bit more, so close, so close. However, Han Yunqing looked at the gold needles in her hand and then at the frozen Zhang Sun-che. She suddenly felt like banging her head against the wall. She was too nervous. She had inserted 2 needles, but she hadn't used enough strength. Zhang Sun-che was drunk and unconscious. The aphrodisiac in his body was the source of his strength. Although he had collapsed, the aphrodisiac hadn't been completely removed. He would soon become restless again. Han Yunqing gasped for breath and immediately used this time to take out a stimulant from the detoxification system. This was the most effective emergency medicine she had. Although using this kind of medicine after drinking was very harmful, she couldn't care less. With 1 needle, she immediately recovered her strength. Just as she was about to add 2 more needles to Zhang Sun-che, she changed her mind and felt that it wasn't appropriate. Princess Changping had stuffed this drugged fellow to her, so she definitely had other plans. If someone barged in and saw this scene, then even if she jumped into the Yellow River, she wouldn't be able to clear her name. Thinking of this, Han Yunqing was completely shocked. Right, what she needed to do now was to escape. However, Han Yunqing soon found that the door was locked from the outside. These people must have planned it well. Han Yunqing immediately looked for the window. Fortunately, the window was not sealed. She moved a chair and stood on tiptoe to escape through the window. After closing the window, she leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. Although she had escaped safely, her heart was still beating wildly, and she was still scared. However, at this moment, 2 familiar voices came from the side. It was none other than Murong Wanru and Eunuch Li. How long has it been? It's been a while. Miss Wanru, isn't it time to call him over? Wait a little longer. Haha, it's more interesting when the rice is cooked. Murong Wanru laughed. Ha, Miss Wanru, I've put enough medicine. It must be boiling now. Eunuch Li also laughed. Alright, then go and call them. I'll wait here. Alright, Miss Wanru, just wait to receive your reward. Since you came up with such a good idea, Princess Changping will definitely reward you handsomely after the deed is done. As soon as he finished speaking, Han Yunqing heard Eunuch Li's footsteps fade into the distance. She slowly narrowed her eyes, her hands clenched into fists. Her anger overflowed to the heavens. What a good Murong Wanru. It's fine if she usually schemed, but I didn't expect it to be her this time. Moreover, she used such dirty methods. This was too much. If someone destroys 1 grain of mine, I'll take 3 grains from them. White Lotus, ah, White Lotus. This time, this Wang Fei won't hold a grudge. If there's a grudge, I'll take revenge now. Han Yunqing followed the wall and silently walked over, only to see Murong Wanru hiding under a small tree on the side. She took a few deep breaths before calmly walking out. As she approached, Han Yunqing suddenly opened her mouth. Wanru, why are you here? Ah! Murong Wanru shrieked and abruptly turned her head, her face full of disbelief. Han Yunqi. That's right, it was Han Yunqing. Why was she here? Wasn't she drunk, unconscious, and in the room? What, you don't want to see me, do you? Han Yunqing coldly asked. No. Murong Wanru was nervous. Who knew that Han Yunqing would ruthlessly sprinkle a handful of poison powder in her face without warning? Murong Wanru subconsciously lowered her head and rubbed her eyes. Before he could finish his words, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Han Yunqing coldly looked at Murong Wanru's obedient little face. She couldn't imagine that she would do such a thing. Very good. Since Murong Wanru had offered this scheme to Princess Changping, then she'd beat her at her own game. She'd let this White Lotus have a taste of what it meant to bring evil upon oneself. Han Yunqing decisively supported Murong Wanru towards the side rooms. She opened the door and tossed Murong Wanru inside. With one unconscious and the other unconscious, the drug should be acting up again. Most likely, there'd be a good show soon. Very quickly, Han Yunqing heard the sound of hurried footsteps. It must be Eunuch Li bringing people to watch the show. She hurriedly retreated to the side and hid in a corner, tidying up her disheveled clothes and hair. One side of her sleeve had been torn, so she tore the other side and disguised it as a bow. As expected, a large group of people soon arrived, with Princess Changping in the lead. Where is he? Where is he? Princess Changping angrily ran over, her face red. She was looking forward to it. She couldn't wait for everyone to see Han Yunqing's humiliated appearance. Han Yunqing, let's see if you have the ability to turn things around this time. Princess, young Master Bei is acting like a drunkard. He's flirting with everyone he sees. No one dares to go near him. We don't know where he ran off to. Eunuch Li replied loudly. Han Yunqing understood as soon as she heard it. This was clearly a set script. Bastard, don't you know that Imperial Qin Ant is also resting here? What if the matter reaches Imperial Ant Qin's ears? What should we do? Princess Changping purposely raised her voice, unable to hide her excitement. Princess, Qin Wangfei is in this room. Nothing will happen to her. Eunuch Li's face was filled with exaggerated worry. He glanced at the bushes on the side and wondered why Murong Wanru hadn't come out yet. It was her turn to go on stage. It was time for her to knock on the Princess Consort's door. However, it didn't matter if Murong Wanru didn't come, as long as there was a good show to watch in the room. No way. Let's go take a look. Princess Changping didn't even wait for Murong Wanru to come out. She rushed to the door in front of her. Everyone was nervous because of Princess Changping, so they all followed her. Dong dong dong. Princess Changping knocked heavily on the door. Imperial Qin Ant, are you awake? Imperial Qin Ant, it's me, Changping. Are you awake? Imperial Qin Ant, please open the door. Princess Changping pretended to call out a few times, a trace of craftiness flashing through her eyes. Without leaving a trace, she pushed the door open a small crack. Aya, why didn't you lock the door? Princess Changping loudly questioned. As soon as she said this, the crowd fell silent. No one present was stupid and they all realized that something was wrong. Imperial Qin Ant, Princess Changping carefully called out, her back to the crowd as the corners of her mouth rose. Very quickly, she impatiently walked in, but who knew that not long after she entered, she would immediately start screaming. Ah! Hearing her scream, Eunuch Li was overjoyed. He knew it was a success. What's going on? Qin Wangfei, Your Highness, what's wrong? Eunuch Li hurriedly pushed the door completely open. In an instant, everyone gathered around. Almost at the same time, Eunuch Li also screamed, "Ah, how could this be? Heavens, it shouldn't be like this." The screen in the room had long been pushed down. Princess Changping was standing by the screen, dumbstruck, her face ashen. Not far from the screen, Zhang Sun-che was wearing only a pair of underwear, pressing down on an unconscious woman and about to undress her. That woman was none other than Murong Wanru. The door was wide open and everyone saw it. Everyone was in disbelief. No one had expected to see such a thing here. Heavens, what had happened? Why was Murong Wanru here? Wasn't this Qin Wangfei's resting room? Zhang Sun-che was under the control of the drug. Even though he was surrounded, his hands continued to move impatiently. Everyone present was stunned and no one stopped him. At this time, Han Yunqing walked out from the side and pushed through the crowd. What's wrong? What's going on? As soon as she reached the door and saw the scene inside, she angrily rebuked, "Insolent Zhang Sun-che, why aren't you stopping?" As soon as these words came out, the stunned crowd slowly recovered their wits. The women all retreated, their faces red. Zhang Sun-che, however, remained unmoved. Pervert. Han Yunqing saw a basin of water on the side and immediately brought it over, splashing it on Zhang Sun-che and Murong Wanru. With this splash of cold water, Zhang Sun-che finally stopped. At the same time, the unconscious Murong Wanru also woke up. She saw the man on top of her and lowered her head to see that her clothes had been torn to shreds. She instantly screamed, "Ah!" This scream could really cut through the sky. It was so ear-piercing that it was unbearable. Murong Wanru panicked. Her beautiful face lost all color, and she was terrified. How could this be? Heavens, what had happened? Get lost! Get lost! Ah, help is here! Someone come! Help, ah! She viciously pushed Zhang Sun-che, wailing and screaming like a madwoman. A trace of coldness flashed through Han Yunqing's eyes. She said angrily, "Someone come, hurry and pull him away." As soon as she said this, Murong Wanru finally noticed the people around her. She also noticed Han Yunqing's presence. She was dumbfounded. How could? Two men rushed out of the crowd and hastily pulled Zhang Sun-che away. Zhang Sun-che's mind was still hazy as he began to struggle and curse. "Let go of me, my wife's waiting for me. You guys let go of me, this master wants to have a good time." Murong Wanru's face contorted in humiliation at these filthy words. She was on the verge of insanity. She didn't have time to think about why Han Yunqing was safe and sound, or why she'd fallen to such a state. She didn't want to hear it, so she covered her ears and began to wail like a madwoman. "Ah, ah, ah," one spoke obscenities while the other screamed non-stop. The situation was on the verge of spiraling out of control. Princess Changping was still frozen in place, while the others didn't dare to make a sound. After all, this wasn't a small matter. Although Murong Wanru was an adopted daughter, she was still a treasure in Grand Concubine Yi's hands. Things had gotten out of hand. Han Yunqing looked coldly at Murong Wanru without a shred of sympathy. If the detox system hadn't warned her today, she'd be the one on the verge of collapse right now. Eunuch Li, gag that beast's mouth and take him away to sober up. Han Yunqing finally spoke up. Eunuch Li gave Princess Changping a look, but she was too frightened to move. Eunuch Li could only brace himself and take the man away. "Murong Wanru, that's enough. Just what's going on? You've lost all face for the Duke of Qin's estate." Han Yunqing's angry voice silenced Murong Wanru's screams. At the same time, Princess Changping recovered her wits and looked over. Chapter 156. At Han Yunqing's fierce tone, Murong Wanru gave a start before rising to her feet. Covering her face, she shoved Han Yunqing aside and ran out of the room. Princess Changping jumped in fright and shouted, "Someone come, quick! Chase after her, she can't take things too hard." "Princess Changping, what are your men doing? They can't even keep an eye on a drunkard. Now that something like this has happened, you should take Zhang Sun Che and explain yourself to Grand Concubine Yi." Han Yunqing scolded angrily. She wasn't worried that Murong Wanru would commit suicide. With her personality, she wouldn't go that far. So speaking, she flicked her sleeves and left. Princess Changping finally reacted when she was far away. "Isn't this your room?" she blurted out. Unfortunately, no one answered her. Now that something like this had happened, the plum blossom meet couldn't continue. Everyone excused themselves and left, not daring to stick their noses into other people's business. Princess Changping had a guilty conscience and didn't dare tarry. After removing the aphrodisiac from Zhang Sun Che, she escorted him to the Duke of Qin's estate to beg for forgiveness. Zhang Sun Che was the most innocent of the lot. He had no idea he'd been poisoned, so when he found out what he'd done, he only assumed it was a result of drunken stupor. His intestines turned green with regret. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have had a drinking contest. As the saying goes, good things don't leave the house, while bad things travel 1,000 li. As soon as Princess Changping arrived at the Duke of Qin's estate, she saw Marquis Pingbei Zhangsun Zhongde and his wife Lady Shui kneeling inside Grand Concubine Yi's rooms, their heads almost touching the floor. "Father, Mother!" Zhang Sun Che cried out. Zhang Sun Tiance and Lady Shui saw their son who'd caused trouble and angrily chased after him to beat him. "You beast, did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall? You usually turn a deaf ear to old man's words. Now that you've caused such trouble, let's see how you'll deal with it." "Che, how could you be so muddle-headed? Miss Wanru is a golden branch and jade leaf. You think you can touch her? Are you trying to take my and your father's lives?" Princess Changping had a guilty conscience and hid far away, not daring to say a single word. But suddenly, there was a loud slap on the table. Princess Changping unconsciously turned to see Grand Concubine Yi sitting in the seat of honor. Her exquisite face was now as gloomy as the skies before a storm. How frightening! Marquis Pingbei and Lady Shui quickly returned to their knees. Zhang Sun Che fell to his knees as well, trembling with fear. He didn't even dare to spare Grand Concubine Yi a glance. Princess Changping couldn't help but shudder. She resentfully walked over and knelt down as well. "Grand Imperial Concubine, Changping. Changping has brought Zhang Sun Che here to offer a humble apology." Grand Concubine Yi's hands landed heavily on the table as they clenched into fists. She was so angry that she couldn't speak. Suddenly, she pounded the table 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. Everyone who heard it trembled with fear as their hearts raced. In the silence of the room, Changping lowered her head even more. At this moment, Han Yunqing spoke up from her seat. "Changping, just what's going on? Hurry and tell us the truth." Murong Wanru had rushed into her room to cry as soon as she came back. No matter how Grand Concubine Yi asked or coaxed her, she wouldn't say a word. Grand Concubine Yi was so angry that she smashed everything in the room. Grand Concubine Yi doted on Murong Wanru as if she were her own daughter. Murong Wanru couldn't accept such a thing, much less Grand Concubine Yi. Moreover, everyone at the Plum Blossom meet had seen it, so it was impossible to hide it. Most likely, everyone in the capital knew by now. The Duke of Qin's estate had lost all face this time. Most frightening of all, Murong Wanru's life was ruined. I don't know anything, I was at the banquet the entire time. It was Eunuch Li who said Zhang Sun Che had gone crazy from drinking, so I hurried over. But who knew? Princess Changping trailed off, glancing at Han Yunqing. "Imperial Qin aunt, I wanted to ask you about this. You were clearly the one resting in that room, so why Why was Wanru in there? Why did she faint? You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask? Han Yunqing retorted angrily, before explaining herself. I rested for a bit before going to the restroom. As soon as I came back, I ran into something like that. The side rooms were all guarded by your men, so how did they do their job? Zhang Sunche went crazy from drinking and Eunuch Li knew to report it. Didn't he have people watching over him? Han Yunqing stood up angrily. You still dare to ask me? It's a good thing I went to the restroom, or else. Heaven knows how much face the Duke of Qin's estate would lose today. Grand Concubine Yi's expression turned even uglier at these words. Finally, she spoke up, her voice frightening. Call Eunuch Li in for me. Eunuch Li, who'd been kneeling by the door all this time, scrambled inside to kneel by Princess Changping's side. To reply esteemed imperial concubine, Zhang Sunche went crazy from drinking and wanted to take liberties with any girl he saw. This old servant couldn't stop him and panicked, so I didn't give any instructions before going to report to the princess. Who knew that those girls all hid away? No one was watching Zhang Sunche. Eunuch Li could only explain it this way. After all, this matter couldn't see the light of day. The fewer people who knew, the better. Thus, he dismissed all the servants, leaving only himself and Murong Wanru to know the truth. Eunuch Li had been sent by the Empress to assist Princess Changping in hosting the Plum Blossom Meet. He was an experienced eunuch. Although he looked terrified and nervous, his answers were much better than Princess Changping's. In any case, the matter had already happened. Zhang Sunche's aphrodisiac had been neutralized, so he had no idea what had happened. No matter how hurt Murong Wanru was, she wouldn't dare to expose Princess Changping. The dead told no tales. Then how did Wanru faint? Why was she in my room? Wasn't she at the banquet? Changping, she should have told you when she left, right? Han Yunqing tossed out a series of questions, asking despite knowing the answer. At these words, Grand Concubine Yi's angry eyes flashed with a complicated look. Grand Concubine Yi had been in the palace for years, so she'd seen all sorts of crafty plots and tricks. She'd had her suspicions about Han Yunqing before, but hearing Han Yunqing's questions set her mind at ease. Everyone was chatting in twos and threes at the time, so I didn't notice her. I only heard her say she was worried about you and wanted to go take a look, Princess Changping replied hastily. Eunuch Li hesitated before adding, esteemed imperial concubine, Zhang Sunche was so drunk that he lost consciousness. It looks like we can only ask Miss Wanru herself how she got into his room. Grand Concubine Yi glared at Zhang Sunche, her gaze as sharp as a knife. She wanted nothing more than to gouge out his heart. Zhang Sunche's family of 3 had been silent the entire time, not daring to lift their heads. Although Marquis Pingbei's estate was a powerful and influential family, it was nothing in Grand Concubine Yi's eyes. Marquis Pingbei was alarmed, but secretly rejoiced in his heart. It was fortunate that this unfilial son had bullied Murong Wanru instead of Qin Wangfei. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be questioned today. His entire family wouldn't be spared either. Silence reigned in the room for a long time before Grand Concubine Yi spoke coldly. Wanru, just how did you get into your sister-in-law's room? And how did you lose consciousness? Everyone was stunned by her words. They never expected Murong Wanru to be here as well, but where was she? Murong Wanru was hiding behind a large screen in the seat of honor. Although her body was curled up and shivering, her teary eyes were filled with malice and resentment. She only remembered running into Han Yunqing in the little garden next to the room. After that, she had no recollection of anything else. She didn't know why she'd lost consciousness, or why she ended up in that room. Of course, she knew Han Yunqing had something to do with this, but she couldn't say it now. As soon as she revealed Han Yunqing's identity, Han Yunqing's personality and skills would definitely investigate to the end. After all, the fact that Han Yunqing could leave that room that day proved that she knew everything. If the truth came out, wouldn't she become a laughingstock? At that time, Marquis Pingbei's estate might even bite her back. As for Princess Chongping, she couldn't even protect herself, much less Murong Wanru. Right now, she was suffering in silence, unable to speak of her bitterness. Grievance, regret, unwillingness, resentment, shame, and fright were all mixed together. She hated Han Yunqing to the core. If it wasn't for Han Yunqing, she wouldn't have fallen to her current state. Her future was gone. Thinking up to here, Murong Wanru bit down on her robes, but her sobs still escaped. As soon as they heard the low sobs behind Grand Concubine Yi, everyone realized that Murong Wanru was there. Grand Concubine Yi was already vexed, but hearing the sobs only made her even angrier. She suddenly shouted, "What are you crying for? Speak! What a disgrace!" At the shout, Murong Wanru's tears fell like rain. She felt so wrong that she even wanted to die. But she had to answer. She didn't want to die, she couldn't accept it. Mufei, sob, I was going to see sister-in-law, but no one answered when I knocked, so I pushed the door. Who knew that the door wasn't locked, so I went in. Who knew, sob. I fainted from fright from that beast. What happened after that, sob. Murong Wanru didn't finish before sobbing and running away. No one answered when she knocked, so she pushed the door open and went in. This matched up with Han Yunqing's story of going to the washroom. Matching up the testimonies of everyone was a natural process with no flaws. Most importantly, Murong Wanru had personally explained how she'd entered the room and fainted. She wouldn't lie, would she? Everything had a cause and effect, but the main culprit was still Zhang Sun-che. As Murong Wanru's sobs faded into the distance, Grand Concubine Yi propped her head up with one hand, breathing heavily from anger. Now that everything was clear, shouldn't it be time to investigate who was responsible? Han Yunqing didn't say a word, but offered up a cup of tea. Grand Concubine Yi glanced at her with furrowed brows. Cold as ever, she said, "Chongping, take your dog servant and scram back to the palace. Tell your Mufei that she has to give me an explanation for this." Leaving aside Chongping, even the Empress dreaded Grand Concubine Yi. The plum blossom meat was given to Princess Chongping by the Empress herself. Eunuch Li was one of the Empress's people, so naturally she had to deal with him. Yes. Chongping understands. Princess Chongping slipped away like a wisp of smoke. It was better to face Mufei than this granny-level Grand Concubine Yi. Once she was gone, only Marquis Pingbei's family of 3 remained in the room. Han Yunqing's lips rose to a languid smile. She knew that the real headache for Grand Concubine Yi was this family of 3. Chapter 157. Although Zhang Sun-che really hadn't done anything to Murong Wanru, everyone had seen the scene in the room and blushed with shame. In other words, Murong Wanru's chastity had been stolen by Zhang Sun-che. Naturally, Zhang Sun-che's crimes couldn't be forgiven, so how could Grand Concubine Yi forgive him so easily? Even killing him wouldn't be enough to vent her anger. But Murong Wanru was still an unmarried maiden who'd lost her chastity to Zhang Sun-che. If Zhang Sun-che died, what would happen to Murong Wanru? Who else could she marry? Would anyone higher than Marquis Pingbei's estate be willing to marry her? Even if she lowered her demands, no one would want to marry her. Smart people knew that the only way to save Murong Wanru's life was to marry her off to Zhang Sun-che. In the silence of the room, Grand Concubine Yi didn't speak. Naturally, Marquis Pingbei was a smart man as well. Although he was furious at his son's actions, he'd long analyzed the situation thoroughly. Seeing Grand Concubine Yi's silence, Marquis Pingbei raised his head and spoke first. "Esteemed imperial concubine, my unfilial son committed such a heinous crime. It's truly unforgivable. It's the father and son's fault for not teaching their son. No matter what esteemed imperial concubine decides, this official and his wife will have no complaints. Only, I beg esteemed imperial concubine to think of Miss Wanru's future and let my unfilial son take responsibility for her until the end. When Marquis Pingbei finished speaking, Grand Concubine Yi glared at him and slammed the table a few more times without a word. Marquis Pingbei secretly nudged his son next to him. Zhang Sunche had already sobered up and knew the severity of the situation. At his father's reminder, he braced himself to raise his head. Fortunately, Grand Concubine Yi wasn't looking at him, or else he wouldn't have the guts. He clasped his hands in front of his chest, his face earnest. Esteemed imperial concubine, please marry Miss Wanru to me. I'll definitely take responsibility until the end and treat her well for the rest of my life. Boom! Grand Concubine Yi slammed the table and glared at him. Frightened, Zhang Sunche immediately lowered his head, not daring to make a sound. Seeing him as cowardly as a mouse, Grand Concubine Yi grew even more indignant. Of course, she knew that the best and only's best option was to marry Murong Wanru to Zhang Sunche. But she couldn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. Wan Wan was the adopted daughter of the Duke of Qin's residence. Marrying the legitimate son of Marquis Pingbei was not considered marrying down. However, Marquis Pingbei's young master was dissolute by nature. He even touched his father's concubine. How could she marry such a dissolute person who ruined the family's reputation? TSS Wanru's TTS, it. Even though Han Yunqing had mentioned marriage before, Grand Concubine Yi had only agreed half-heartedly. In her heart, she still couldn't bear to part with her daughter and hoped that one day she'd become the Duke of Qin's concubine so she could keep her company at home. But now she had no choice but to marry, and to such a disgraceful thing. Marquis Pingbei kept tugging at his son's robes, urging him to take on more responsibility. But Zhang Sunche looked like a suave, dandy, and arrogant man, but he was only strong on the outside and weak on the inside. After Grand Concubine Yi's scare, he didn't dare to raise his head again. Moreover, he didn't want to marry Murong Wanru either. If she married into Marquis Pingbei's estate as Grand Concubine Yi's foster daughter, wouldn't he be tightly controlled? How could he have good days in the future? Unable to urge his son, Marquis Pingbei spoke again, his tone earnest and heartfelt. Esteemed imperial concubine, things have already come to this. For the sake of Miss Wanru's future, please think thrice. Han Yunqing, who'd been silent all this time, spoke up in a low voice. Mu Fei, you didn't see the scene. All the participants of the Plum Blossom meet, men and women, including the servants, all saw it. Good deeds don't leave the house, but evil deeds travel 1,000 li. Who knows what kind of rumors will spread tomorrow morning? They'll definitely add oil and vinegar to the fire. If they hurt Wanru then, wouldn't she be even more? Grand Concubine Yi knitted her brows as Han Yunqing lowered her voice again. Mu Fei, Qinxia knows that you're unwilling to accept things as they are. Wanru isn't willing either, but it's better than having Wanru carry an infamy for the rest of her life and hide in the estate. Actually, Grand Concubine Yi understood even without Han Yunqing's words. She just couldn't swallow her anger. Zhang Sunche had committed a crime, but not only had he escaped punishment, he'd gained a wife for nothing. Seeing that Grand Concubine Yi still wouldn't relent, Han Yunqing's eyes flashed with craftiness before she continued. Mu Fei, since there's still time tonight, why don't we agree to this marriage? Tomorrow morning, we can have Marquis Pingbei's estate announce the engagement with great fanfare and cover up all the rumors. We'll spread the word to the public that Wanru and Zhang Sunche are mutually in love and have been in love for a long time. This way, no matter whether outsiders believe it or not, we can at least save some face, right? At these words, Grand Concubine Yi finally looked at Han Yunqing seriously. Engagement? Exactly. First, the engagement will suppress the rumors outside and give Wanru some time to cool down. As for marriage, after both sides have calmed down, we'll talk about our plans. Han Yunqing found her own words laughable as she spoke. Announcing the engagement with great fanfare was the same as cooking raw rice into cooked rice. Then the marriage was inevitable and there was nothing else to plan. But to the vexed grand concubine Yi, these words were like a cup of cold tea in the hottest days of the summer. Finally, it suppressed the flames of anger in her heart. She gave Han Yunqing a serious look before exhaling. "That's all we can do." Han Yunqing rejoiced in her heart before she said considerately, "Mu Fei, Chinxia counts as Wanru's sister-in-law. Let Chinxia discuss the details of the engagement with Marquis Pingbei and his wife." Grand concubine Yi didn't even want to spare Zhang Sun Che a glance, much less discuss the details. She had no choice but to agree. After making her decision, Grand concubine Yi finally recovered from the blow. Cold, she looked towards Marquis Pingbei with an air of haughtiness. "Zhang Sun Zhongde, since Wanru and your son are mutually in love with each other, and you and your wife came overnight to propose marriage, I won't make things difficult for you. Tomorrow morning, we'll settle the marriage. As for when, we'll discuss it another day." This was an order, not a discussion. As soon as Grand concubine Yi finished, she rose to leave with a flick of her sleeves, leaving Marquis Pingbei's family of 3 kneeling in place. Both of them were in love with each other. When did Murong Wanru and Zhang Sun Che couldn't figure it out. He was about to ask when Marquis Pingbei shut him up with a glare. Han Yunqing looked over with a smile. "Marquis Zhang Sun, do you have any objections?" Marquis Pingbei hastened to say, "No. No. My son and Miss Wanru are mutually in love with each other, that's something everyone knows. Many thanks to esteemed imperial concubine for her favor and willing to marry Miss Wanru off to Marquis Pingbei's estate. We husband and wife can't thank you enough. Tomorrow morning, we'll definitely prepare the betrothal gifts and personally deliver the betrothal gifts." As expected, Marquis Pingbei was a smart man. He caught on with a hint, which saved Han Yunqing a lot of talking. She smiled in satisfaction. "Miss Wanru might be the Duke of Qin's foster daughter, but she's still one of us. An engagement isn't a small matter. Marquis Zhang Sun shouldn't be too shabby, lest you make esteemed imperial concubine unhappy." Han Yunqing didn't finish her sentence, but Marquis Pingbei was already nodding his head. "Many thanks to esteemed Wang Fei for the reminder. Everything, this official knows what to do." "I know." "Very good." Han Yunqing liked to talk to smart people. She was certain that tomorrow's engagement ceremony would be a grand affair that wouldn't lose out to the wedding procession. She didn't make things difficult for them, but left them with a few more words before letting them go back. Currently, Grand concubine Yi was coaxing Murong Wanru in the orchid courtyard. Standing by the courtyard entrance, one could hear Murong Wanru's sobs and Grand concubine Yi's occasional angry rebukes. Han Yunqing glanced at it and couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Bai Lianhua, Bai Lianhua. Even you didn't think you'd fall into the hole you dug for yourself. Once tomorrow's wedding was set, Bai Lianhua would be married off after the new year." Thinking up to here, Han Yunqing couldn't help but look forward to the future. Bai Lianhua wasn't living in the estate, but she was on good terms with Grand concubine Yi. Her days would be much more stable now, and she wouldn't have to live in a corner of the hibiscus courtyard anymore. When she reached the gates of the hibiscus courtyard, she glanced at the pitch-black sleeping quarters in the distance. Han Yunqing mused that if she wanted to move out of the hibiscus courtyard, that bastard Long Fei shouldn't refuse, right? He'd rather she stay far away from his lands, wouldn't he? As Han Yunqing mused, she unconsciously stood there for a long time. She hadn't seen him for days now, so she didn't know what he was busy with. Early the next morning, the sound of firecrackers could be heard from Xuanwu Avenue. While others gave their daughters 10 li of red dowry, Marquis Pingbei's estate gave their betrothal gifts 10 li away. 2 red-robed servants carried a chest full of betrothal gifts and lined it up in pairs. They formed a long dragon on Xuanwu Avenue, mighty and bustling with noise and excitement. Marquis Pingbei and his wife brought Zhang Sun Che along with a wedding nanny at the very front. Aside from Zhang Sun-che's unsightly expression, everyone else was beaming from ear to ear with happiness. It wasn't far from Marquis Pingbei's estate to the Duke of Qin's estate, but the procession took a detour on purpose to attract countless onlookers. As soon as they heard that Marquis Pingbei was going to the Duke of Qin's estate for the betrothal, everyone broke into discussion. Moreover, Marquis Pingbei had arranged for quite a few people in the crowd. Thus, news of Murong Wanru and Zhang Sun-che's mutual affection spread like wildfire. Although news of yesterday's plum blossom meet spread as well, it didn't gain the upper hand. It wasn't clear how Grand Concubine Yi had convinced Murong Wanru, but she still attended the engagement ceremony. Her eyes were red as she glared at Han Yunqing. Her previous delicate and pitiful demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Most likely, she knew Han Yunqing was the one who came up with the idea. Han Yunqing allowed her to look as she pleased, but she didn't expect Long Fei to show up as well. Still, after thinking it over, she realized that as her older brother, he really should be there. After the engagement ceremony, everyone dispersed. Grand Concubine Yi exhaled and said, "Fei, Wanru's marriage, what do you think?" Hearing this, Murong Wanru quickly looked over, but Long Fei Yi only replied, "It's too rushed to get married within the year. Let's set it after the new year." This wasn't the answer Grand Concubine Yi wanted, much less Murong Wanru. When she realized that she had no fate with the Duke of Qin in this lifetime, Murong Wanru's heart filled with sorrow. Her eyes reddened as she covered her mouth and ran away. All of this was caused by Han Yunqing. It was all Han Yunqing's fault. She silently vowed in her heart that even if she got married, she wouldn't let Han Yunqing off so easily. Seeing Murong Wanru like this and her son's cold demeanor, Grand Concubine Yi couldn't help but knit her brows. So annoying. But it was then that Gui Mama came to report, "Grand Imperial Concubine, Your Highness, Princess Rongla has come to pay a visit." Chapter 158. Duan Muyao really came to pay a visit. Everyone in the city knew that Marquis Pingbei's estate had come to the Duke of Qin's estate for the betrothal. Wasn't it inappropriate for Duan Muyao to choose this day to pay a visit? But she'd come at the right time. The betrothal guests had all left before she came to visit. Han Yunqing couldn't help but suspect that this woman had predicted that Long Fei Yi would be at the estate and picked a good time to come. But did she really have to go to this extent just to see her senior brother? Yao Yao, that girl's finally here. Grand Concubine Yi, who hadn't smiled since last night, finally revealed a smile. Her Yao Yao was proof of her close relationship with Duan Muyao. Han Yunqing couldn't help but think that if Duan Muyao married into the Duke of Qin's estate, they'd be a perfect match for each other. What kind of scene would it be on the day of the wedding? It'd probably be twice as grand as the one at Marquis Pingbei's estate today. Grand Concubine Yi and Long Fei Yi would definitely be waiting at the gates early to welcome them. Even if she'd racked her brains to think of ways to mend relations with Grand Concubine Yi, Duan Muyao's arrival could easily ruin everything. Grand Concubine Yi liked a daughter-in-law who made her proud. When she recalled the scene when she'd first entered the gates, bitterness rose in her heart. Before Grand Concubine Yi could speak, Long Fei Yi waved a hand to signal Gui Mama to invite her inside. Han Yunqing glanced at him before silently turning to leave. You could call her a coward, but she didn't like places like this. She only wanted a place, not anything to fight for. But before she could slip out the door, Grand Concubine Yi called her back. Yunqi, where are you going? Qinxia suddenly felt a little dizzy and wanted to go back and rest. Han Yunqing didn't even want to look back as she found an excuse. Long Fei Yi suddenly spoke up. Since you have a headache, go rest so you won't be impolite. Impolite? Han Yunqing gave a start before smiling. He didn't want her to receive Duan Muyao as the mistress of the house, did he? There was no need for him to worry. She still had self-awareness and would not speak carelessly. Grand Concubine Yi said seriously, Yao Yao isn't an outsider, so there's nothing to be rude about. Moreover, They'll be a family in the future, so we should get to know each other better. As soon as he said that, Han Yunqing felt as if she had been hit hard by something. Her head was in a daze, and she really couldn't come back to her senses. Could it be that Duanmu Yao's marriage alliance with the Duke of Qin wasn't just a rumor? Had Grand Concubine Yi tacitly agreed to it? Han Yunqing finally turned around and looked at Long Fei Yi. At this time, Long Fei Yi was also looking at her, but he only glanced at her once before moving away. Long Fei Yi didn't react to Grand Concubine Yi's words. Yunshi, come here, Grand Concubine Yi beckoned with a hand. Han Yunqing could only walk over and sit by her side. Permitted. Yao Yao is Fei's junior sister and is famous for her talents. You'll have plenty of chances to interact in the future, so you should learn from her, Grand Concubine Yi instructed. Han Yunqing smiled coldly in her heart. Grand Concubine Yi had spent an entire day and night on Murong Wanru's affairs. She probably didn't know anything else about the plum blossom meat yet, but she wanted her to learn from a defeated opponent. She laughed in her heart without explaining a thing. She knew that Grand Concubine Yi liked Duanmu Yao not because of her talents, but because of her illustrious birth. Western Zhou's princess of the first wife and Tianshan Kenzo's genius female disciple, a daughter-in-law like this would bring her a lot of glory. From now on, no one would say that the Duke of Qin had married a commoner or a good-for-nothing. After finally settling that White Lotus Murong Wanru, she never expected Duanmu Yao to show up right after. She didn't fight for it, but would others allow her to have a place in the estate? Would they allow her to claim half of the title of Duke of Qin's official consort? Very soon, Duanmu Yao arrived by herself. Gui Mama respectfully followed behind her, carrying 3 heavy gifts. Those who didn't know better might even think that Gui Mama was one of Duanmu Yao's servants. Today, Duanmu Yao was dressed in a snow-white robe, the edges of which were dotted with red flowers. She was already pure and untainted, looking like a celestial immortal. The addition of her white robes made her seem even more ethereal. She strode in and immediately curtsied to Grand Concubine Yi with a slight smile. 10,000 blessings to esteemed imperial concubine. Dispense with the formalities, dispense with the formalities. Come, let me take a good look. It's been years since we've seen each other. Grand Concubine Yi's heart was swept away. It was clear to see how much she liked Duanmu Yao. Duanmu Yao walked over without sparing Han Yunqing a glance as she squeezed herself between her and Grand Concubine Yi. The main seat could fit 2 people at most, so Han Yunqing was about to move aside when Grand Concubine Yi said, "Yunshi, you sit on the side." Han Yunqing silently rolled her eyes. She wanted to leave, all right? Han Yunqing's eyes flashed with a smug smile as she asked, "Senior brother, last time I told you to send my greetings to esteemed imperial concubine. You haven't forgotten, have you?" "I forgot," Long Fei Yi replied simply. "You've always been like this since you were young." Duanmu Yao looked askance at him before explaining to Grand Concubine Yi. Esteemed imperial concubine, Yao Yao wanted to pay respects as soon as she reached the capital, but I was delayed by matters until today. Yao Yao came back this time especially to give you something good. This year, you will stay at the estate to celebrate the new year. Duanmu Yao was overjoyed at the turn of events. She never expected her senior brother to be so easy to negotiate with. Long Fei Yi didn't object, while Han Yunqing kept her head bowed. Both of them were silent. At this moment, Duanmu Yao walked down to sit by Long Fei Yi's side with a mysterious smile. "Senior brother, the last present is for you. Guess what it is?" "I don't know," Long Fei Yi's tone was mild, but he still replied. Duanmu Yao was overwhelmed by favor from superior. After all, she'd always found excuses to give senior brother things over the years, but he'd always replied with 2 words, "No need." Now that senior brother had answered her like this, could it be that he'd finally come to terms with her and was willing to accept her? After all, she hadn't been able to find him after that day. If not for the joyous occasion at the Duke of Qin's estate today, she probably wouldn't have seen him again. Senior brother, take a guess. This is something from our celestial mountain as well. Master's seen it before and said you'd definitely like it. Duanmu Yao said happily. I can't guess. Long Fei Ye's reply was as mild as ever. Duanmu Yao scooted closer and whined. Senior brother, just guess once. Just once is enough. At this moment, Han Yunqing finally raised her head to look at them. One was silent while the other was acting spoiled, one was as handsome as a god while the other was as beautiful as a celestial fairy. She truly felt that the two of them were a perfect match made in heaven and earth. Han Yunqing was staring blankly when Long Fei Yi guessed correctly. Snow wine. Duanmu Yao shrieked in delight at his words and grabbed his arm. Senior brother, you actually remember. It's been 10 years, I didn't expect you to still remember. She let go of his arm and personally took out the pot of snow wine. 10 years ago, I specially buried this for you. I thought you'd forget. 10 years, so they'd known each other for so long. Han Yunqing couldn't help but think of a saying. You only live once. 1 second less to meet you is 1 second less to have you in my life. In my next life, we may not meet again. Knowing each other from 10 years ago and being willing to remember each other from 10 years ago, how nice. Han Yunqing sighed inwardly and picked up her tea to take a sip. Long Fei Yi had only said it casually and hadn't expected it to be so coincidental. He glanced at Han Yunqing and saw that Han Yunqing was drinking her tea with her head lowered, seemingly very relaxed. Finally, his face, which was as cold as ice, suddenly turned a few degrees colder. He didn't understand what Han Yunqing was doing. Back then, she'd shamelessly kicked the sedan chair door to marry him, but now she was standing aloof from worldly affairs. What did this woman take him for? She wanted to climb up the social ladder so she could do so, but she didn't want to play anymore. What right did she have? Was the title of Qin Wangfei just for fun? Senior brother, do you want to unseal it and taste it? It's been 10 years. Duanmu Yao was drowning in happiness. I'll unseal it tonight. You stay for dinner. This was the first time Long Fei Yi had asked a guest to stay. All right. Duanmu Yao nodded immediately, afraid that Long Fei Yi would change his mind. Her heart was surging with emotions, while Grand Concubine Yi was thrilled. She immediately ordered Gue Mama to prepare dinner. But Han Yunqing's eyes drooped as she thought to herself, looks like Long Fei Yi won't be going out after the new year. There should be 2 joyous events at the Duke of Qin's estate after the new year. When Duanmu Yao saw that Han Yunqing hadn't said a word, her eyes flashed with disdain. But she wasn't planning to let her off so easily. That's right, esteemed Wangfei. I came in a hurry and didn't prepare any gifts for you. You won't blame me, right? She asked seriously. Han Yunqing finally raised her head, her expression indifferent. I won't. She didn't care. But Duanmu Yao provoked her again. Esteemed Wangfei, I forgot to ask you. You won't mind if I spend the new year at your estate, right? Chapter 159. Would she mind? So what if she did? Could Han Yunqing say no? Duanmu Yao was clearly asking the obvious to flaunt her strength. Han Yunqing was so silent that she seemed especially quiet. Seeing this, Duanmu Yao's smile grew even more scornful. Today, she had to make this woman say, I don't mind. She'd let her know that even though she was Qin Wangfei, she had no say in this household. She wasn't anything. Duanmu Yao pressed on. Esteemed Wangfei, you're not speaking, does that mean you mind? But Han Yunqing's cold gaze suddenly bore down on Duanmu Yao as she replied, Of course I mind. This, Duanmu Yao was caught off guard. She was left speechless, while Grand Concubine Yi and Long Fei Yi both looked towards Han Yunqing in surprise. Amidst the silence, Han Yunqing's lips rose into a smile. Princess Rongla, I was just joking. I didn't scare you, did I? This, Duanmu Yao was caught off guard again. She didn't know what to say as she stared at Han Yunqing's laughing face. Fortunately, Grand Concubine Yi spoke up to smooth things over. Yunqi just likes to joke around. Yao Yao, don't mind her. I won't, of course I won't. I know she's joking too. Duanmu Yao smiled in embarrassment, finding a way to step down. But Han Yunqing kept asking. Princess Rongla, I won against you at the plum blossom meet. You won't mind, right? As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked again. Duanmu Yao's face turned black. She was rejoicing this morning that Murong Wanru's matter would overshadow yesterday's plum blossom meet. At the very least, news wouldn't spread so quickly. But Han Yunqing actually brought it up in front of Grand Concubine Yi and senior brother. It was obvious that she wanted to embarrass her. How was she supposed to reply? Princess Rongla, you're not speaking, you don't really mind, do you? Han Yunqing asked the exact same question Duanmu Yao had asked her. Give her a taste of her own medicine. Let's see if this woman still dares to provoke me. Today, I'll let her understand what it means to seek death. She had been silent for so long and had put on a posture of not giving in to her. Who knew that this woman would take advantage of her and continue to provoke her? Although Han Yunqing didn't like to compete, she also had a temper. If she didn't show her power, she would be treated as a sick cat. Before Duanmu Yao could reply, Grand Concubine Yi grew curious. She won the plum blossom meet? What's going on? Mother, you still don't know, right? Yesterday at the Plum Blossom Garden, Princess Rongla made a bet with Qinxie. If Qinxie lost, Qinxie would never compose a poem again. Qinxie accidentally won. Han Yunqing spoke casually as if it was a trivial matter, but Grand Concubine Yi was astonished. You won. Han Yunqing smiled and nodded innocently. How could Grand Concubine Yi believe it? In her eyes, Han Yunqing's only skill was poisons. As for poetry, zither, chess, calligraphy, and other elegant things, how could a young miss from a small family like her understand such things? At the plum blossom meet, she only hoped that Han Yunqing wouldn't lose face for her. Moreover, Yao Yao's poetry was famous throughout all of Cloud Realm continent. Yao Yao, is this true? Grand Concubine Yi asked in disbelief. Duanmu Yao felt even more humiliated at this question, but she had no choice but to feign generosity with a smile. Emichum, Qin Wangfei has such talent and learning. Yao Yao willingly admits defeat, so why would I mind? Grand Concubine Yi finally believed the truth and couldn't help but shoot a strange look towards Han Yunqing. Duanmu Yao couldn't accept this. She wanted to change the topic, but never expected Han Yunqing to keep asking questions. Princess Rongla, last time at Medicine Ghost Valley, I accidentally won against you too. You won't mind, right? This, Duanmu Yao almost choked on her words. What did Han Yunqing mean by this? Was she bringing up old scores again and again? Duanmu Yao couldn't help but feel humiliated when she recalled how she'd used the medicine Google to search for medicine. She'd been immensely pleased with herself back then, but Han Yunqing had tricked her in the end and left her battered and exhausted. Now Grand Concubine Yi was bewildered. You two ran into each other last time. Han Yunqing gave a concise explanation of the Medicine Ghost Valley competition last time. Hearing this, Duanmu Yao almost lost her temper and told her to shut up. Grand Concubine Yi's shock turned to pride before she realized that Han Yunqing was humiliating Duanmu Yao. Her eyes flashed with anger before she smiled and tried to smooth things over. The two of you are quite fated. We should have a good chat at dinner later. But Han Yunqing rose to her feet and said seriously, Mufei, Qinxie made an appointment early in the evening, so it's not good for me to decline. If Princess Rongla doesn't mind, Qinxie will take her leave first. Although she was asking Grand Concubine Yi, she was looking at Duanmu Yao. The provocation in her eyes was no less than Duanmu Yao's scorn from before. This noble princess wanted to trample her beneath her feet before she even stepped through the doors. No way. It was fine if she didn't speak, but as soon as she did, she'd show her who was boss. Of course, Grand Concubine Yi could sense the tension between the two of them. She glanced towards Long Fei, only to see him drinking tea with his head bowed, looking as if he had nothing to do with the matter. Her son's attitude towards Princess Rongla was still unclear, so Grand Concubine Yi didn't dare to act on her own. She glared unhappily at Han Yunqing, but Han Yunqing's indifference made it hard for her to lose face. She could only give Duan Muyao a way out. Yao Yao, since Yunqi has an appointment, you two can chat another day. You don't mind, right? Duan Muyao was about to go crazy at the word mind, but Grand Concubine Yi had asked so nicely that she had to put on a generous front even if she didn't like it. Smiling, she said, of course. I don't mind. Han Yunqing was very satisfied. She smiled and said, then Yunqi will take her leave first. So speaking, she gracefully turned to leave. Her steps and posture were indescribably confident and at ease. Nobody noticed that the silent Long Fei Yi had long raised his head to stare at her retreating form, his lips drawn up in a satisfied smile. Han Yunqing didn't have an appointment at all. When she returned to the leisurely cloud pavilion, Zhao Mama had already prepared a table full of delicious dishes. She was clearly hungry, but when she picked up her chopsticks, she suddenly lost her appetite. She didn't know what to eat. Esteemed Wang Fei, the kitchen's prepared many dishes tonight. This servant secretly gave you a few, so hurry and try them, Zhao Mama coaxed. Of course she knew that His Highness's junior sister had come, but she didn't dare to ask when esteemed Wang Fei didn't accompany her. Has the banquet started yet? Han Yunqing asked mildly. It just started, Zhao Mama replied honestly. Han Yunqing mused that the bottle of snow wine that had been sealed away for 10 years should have been opened by now. Long Fei Yi must really like that wine to remember it so clearly. She picked up her chopsticks and poked at a few pieces of vegetables. She wanted to make do with it, but in the end she lost her appetite and decided not to eat. Instead, she changed her clothes and prepared to go out for some fresh air. Unexpectedly, she'd hardly stepped out the door when she saw Long Fei Yi sitting in her courtyard, facing the door. Han Yunqing's feet paused as she subconsciously took a step back. When did this guy come? What was he doing here instead of accompanying the honored guests? Was he here to settle accounts with her on behalf of Duan Muyao? Seeing her retreat, Long Fei Yi's playful smile deepened. He asked, who did you have an appointment with? Han Yunqing didn't move forward, but looked at him and replied honestly, Chinxia didn't have an appetite, so I found an excuse to leave. Where are you planning to go? Long Fei Yi asked again. What does it have to do with you? Han Yunqing grumbled in her heart. However, under normal circumstances, she would still be a little afraid of this guy. She obediently replied, I just wanted to go out for some fresh air. Are you in a bad mood? Long Fei Yi asked again. Han Yunqing avoided his question and asked back, isn't it inappropriate for your highness to not accompany the honored guests at this time? Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi said, this prince also doesn't have an appetite. I was just thinking of going out for some fresh air. Let's go. As he spoke, he stood up and walked out of the courtyard. Han Yunqing was stunned. What did this guy mean? Was he going to abandon little junior sister? Wasn't he going to open the bottle of snow wine? Was this, all right? Long Fei Yi had already walked to the entrance of the courtyard, but Han Yunqing was still standing in the same spot. Looking at his proud and lofty back, she felt that it was unreal. Long Fei Yi turned back and asked coldly, Han Yunqing, you're still not leaving? Han Yunqing was still hesitating when Zhao Mama gave her a hard shove from behind and pushed her out the door. Long Fei's lips curved into a smile when he saw her come out. Without another word, he turned to leave. Seeing this, Han Yunqing turned back to glare at Zhao Mama, but she'd long vanished from sight. She looked at Long Fei Ye's retreating form again and hesitated for a moment before chasing after him. Long Fei Ye walked in front with Han Yunqing 3 paces behind him. The two of them were silent the entire way. When they passed by the flower gardens, Han Yunqing looked towards Grand Concubine Yi's peony courtyard. Seeing that it was brightly lit, it was hard to imagine how Duanmu Yao would feel after being stood up. But she knew it had to be terrible. Thinking up to here, she couldn't help but secretly rejoice. As she walked forward, she suddenly bumped into Long Fei Ye. Han Yunqing immediately backed away, thinking that she'd bumped into his back. But when she looked up, she saw that he was facing her from the front. When did he turn around? What are you looking at? Long Fei Ye asked. Han Yunqing had long tossed the idea of curiosity killing the cat to the back of her mind. She probed, Your Highness, why don't you go keep her company for a while? That food and wine isn't to your lordship's liking. Long Fei Ye seemed to grow impatient. This time, he really didn't wait for her after he finished speaking. He left so quickly that Han Yunqing had to jog to catch up. That food and wine isn't to your liking. Han Yunqing mulled over his words, feeling that there was more to them than met the eye. But she didn't understand what Long Fei Ye meant, much less his attitude towards Duanmu Yao's marriage alliance. After thinking it over, she began to suspect that he'd been forced to marry her, just like how Emperor Tianhui had forced him to do so. It was already the end of the year, so the streets were bustling with activity. Lanterns and colored banners decorated the streets as everyone prepared for the occasion. Small stalls and peddlers were doing a brisk business as well. After leaving the Duke of Qin's estate, the two of them quickly blended into the crowd. Han Yunqing walked behind Long Fei Ye the entire time, but Long Fei Ye didn't turn back to look at her. Instead, he slowed down his steps, as if afraid that she'd lose track of him. Han Yunqing had no idea where he was going, so she followed him aimlessly. But as she walked and walked, she suddenly stopped. She discovered that the tender fragrance tea house she'd visited not too long ago had been sealed up. Chapter 160. Long Fei Ye's back was to Han Yunqing, but he knew immediately when she stopped. He turned around and saw Han Yunqing staring at the sealed tender fragrance tea house. He seemed to want to say something, but stopped himself. Cold eyes were fixed on her. Han Yunqing wondered if Gu's tea house had been sealed up by Long Fei Ye again. Was it because Long Fei bumped into her the last time she came back for a meal? She couldn't help but feel heartache for Gu. Celestial Fragrance Tea House had a criminal record, so Long Fei Ye could seal up his businesses at any time. Why didn't that fellow know to keep a low profile? Han Yunqing was about to leave when she realized that Long Fei Ye was staring at her. She immediately averted her gaze. Are you very familiar with Gu? Long Fei Ye asked. Han Yunqing immediately shook her head. Your Highness has investigated him before, so you should know him better than Qinxia, right? Long Fei Ye had indeed investigated, but all he found out was that Gu was a merchant with vast wealth and properties all over the world. As for his poison skills or martial arts master, there were no clues at all. Judging from his age, he had to have an extremely powerful backer if he wanted to be rich. Unfortunately, Chu Shifeng hadn't found much information yet. Your lordship sees that you two are very familiar with each other, Long Fei Ye said next, clearly alluding to their meeting at Heavenly Fragrance Tea House that day. Han Yunqing hated this kind of questioning tone. She hadn't asked him anything, so what right did he have to ask about her private life? For better or for worse, he saved Qinxia's life once, so he counts as a friend. Han Yunqing's words were 70% true. Although Gu wasn't serious at all, he didn't harbor any enmity. It was better to have one more friend than one more enemy. Long Fei Ye just looked at her deeply and didn't ask any more questions. He turned around and continued to walk forward. They were already silent to begin with, but after this, they grew even more silent. Still, Han Yunqing followed behind them from beginning to end, while Long Fei didn't walk too fast. One in front, the other behind, they seemed to have a tacit understanding. Han Yunqing kept her head down, immersed in her own world. Suddenly, Long Fei Ye's voice seemed to descend from the sky. "Are you hungry?" She looked up and found that this guy was standing right in front of her. She was one step away from bumping into him. A little. In fact, she had been starving for a long time. She could be considered a swift and decisive person, but every time she was in front of this guy, it was as if she had changed into a different person. She was not reserved, but she was especially sensitive. Long Fei Yi didn't speak, but entered a restaurant on the side. Han Yunqing hurried to follow him. Long Fei Yi asked for a private room, and the two of them sat across from each other. Long Fei Yi pushed the menu in front of her, indicating that she should order. Han Yunqing didn't refuse. She ordered a few dishes that she liked, then pushed the menu in front of him without a word. Long Fei Yi glanced at it, then poured a jug of wine before calling for the dishes to be served. While they waited, the two of them remained silent in the room. It was as if the whole world had fallen silent. Han Yunqing couldn't stand the silence and inadvertently raised her head, only to meet Long Fei Ye's deep gaze. She gave a start and subconsciously wanted to avoid it, but decided to find a topic to talk about. Thus, she asked mildly, "Your Highness, is there any news about that masked man from last time?" Although Madame Li was dead and all of Tianning's poisoned spies had been purged, the existence of the masked man was still an enormous threat. With Long Fei Ye's personality, he wouldn't let it go so easily. "There's a bit of a lead, but it's still better to investigate." Long Fei Yi didn't hide anything. These days, he'd been busy with this matter as well. If he guessed correctly, that masked man should be a high-ranking member of Northern Li's imperial clan. Naturally, it wasn't easy to investigate the situation in Northern Li's imperial clan, but he could start with the poison sects of the Jianghu. Such a formidable person must have some reputation in their circles. Once there was a topic to talk about, Han Yunqing felt much more at ease, as if she'd been granted amnesty. "What leads?" she asked anxiously. Actually, she'd asked around in secret as well. Gu Beiyue had said that someone with such formidable poison skills must have come from a sect. Gu Beiyue had also said that there were plenty of poison sects in the world, but they'd all originated from the poison caves in the medical academy. Now that the poison caves in the medical academy were closed, the sects had flourished in the past 2 years. Still, poison was poison, and detoxification masters were poisoners as well. Thus, most of these sects weren't accepted by the orthodox medical community and formed their own circles. It wasn't easy for outsiders to join them. Long Fei Yi didn't answer Han Yunqing's question, nor would he tell her that when he'd interrogated Madame Li's subordinates, he'd found out that the mysterious man had kidnapped Han Yunqing not to threaten him, but to target Han Yunqing herself. An ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring would arouse the envy of others. Han Yunqing had such brilliant poison skills, so how many pairs of eyes were watching her from the shadows? Leaving aside the distant ones, Emperor Tianhui himself was a huge source of trouble. Where did Lady Tianxin get those poison and medical manuals? Long Fei Yi changed the topic. Han Yunqing said that she'd learned her poison skills from her mother's poison and medical manuals. Although her story was flawless and the dead couldn't bear witness, how could he believe it so easily? He'd investigated Lady Tianxin before, but discovered that her birth family was a fake. This woman with brilliant medical skills who'd helped Han Kangan prosper was simply a mystery that had appeared out of thin air. Long Fei Yi had long gone to the justice courts to interrogate Han Kangan. Of course, Han Yunqing had no idea. "I don't know either. I found it when I was rummaging through her belongings," Han Yunqing continued to lie. She really didn't know whether Lady Tianxin knew poison skills. Very soon, the food and wine arrived. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything else, but started eating. After chatting for a while, Han Yunqing felt much more at ease and relaxed as she ate. She reached out with her chopsticks to pick up some food, but accidentally bumped into Long Fei Ye's chopsticks. She immediately withdrew her chopsticks, but Long Fei Yi acted like a gentleman and placed some food into her bowl without a sound. Thanks. Han Yunqing glanced at him and saw that he was sitting upright with one hand holding a bowl and the other holding a pair of chopsticks. Even his movements as he ate were graceful. She didn't know that this was the first time His Highness Duke of Qin had ever picked up food for someone other than his mother. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if he'd been like this the other day when he'd gone shopping and eaten with Duan Muyao. Thinking up to here, Han Yunqing couldn't help but fall into a dilemma. The first time she'd met Duan Muyao was during the fight against the poison python. Long Fei Yi had risked his life to protect this little junior sister of his. He hadn't been polite in the face of Medicine Ghost Valley's enemies. But now, he'd accepted Duan Muyao's gift one moment, then ran over to go shopping with her the next. Just what kind of place did Duan Muyao hold in his heart? What if, she guessed right, Emperor Tianhui was forcing him into a marriage again? Would he have no way to refuse? Would he have to marry Duan Muyao after the new year? Seeing Long Fei eat in silence, Han Yunqing felt a sudden impulse. She really wanted to ask him directly if he was willing to marry her. But when she recalled that Emperor Tianhui had forced her into his arms, she resentfully lowered her head and ate in silence. Everything was quiet throughout the meal. Han Yunqing discovered that if she didn't try to find a topic to talk about, this fellow could stay silent for an entire night. Of course, his silence wasn't stuffy, but a kind of cold detachment. Even though they were close, he kept her at arm's length. After the meal, Long Fei Yi didn't say anything else. Han Yunqing continued to follow behind him until all the hustle and bustle in the streets had died down. Only then did they return to the Duke of Qin's estate. As luck would have it, they saw Grand Concubine Yi personally escorting Duan Muyao out the door. Duan Muyao was already feeling gloomy after being stood up by Long Fei Yi. She was out of sorts all night, but had no choice but to accompany Grand Concubine Yi to eat and chat. She even comforted the woman about Murong Wanru's marriage. When she saw Long Fei Yi return, she immediately went forward. "Senior brother, where did you go? I was still waiting for you to open that jug of snow wine." "I left it for Imperial Muhu to drink," Long Fei Yi replied. Hadn't he accepted it before? This was the goodwill she'd stored away for 10 whole years. Duan Muyao's heart felt stifled. She was about to speak when she saw Han Yunqing walk up from behind Long Fei Yi. Could it be, senior brother went out with this woman? What a Han Yunqing! It was fine if she didn't show her face, but she even stole senior brother away. How could she swallow this? In an instant, Duan Muyao's heart burned with jealousy. Her hands clenched into fists within her sleeves as she lost her mind. Throwing caution to the wind, she asked loudly, "Senior brother, what are your plans for the marriage alliance after the new year?" Han Yunqing gave a start at these words. She'd never dared to ask, but Duan Muyao did. Grand Concubine Yi gave a start as well, her expression complicated as she looked at her son. But Long Fei Yi acted as if he hadn't heard a thing. Without a word, he strode away. Now Grand Concubine Yi was incensed. "Fei, stop right there." Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi ignored her. "Senior brother." Duan Muyao stamped her feet and chased after him. Long Fei Ye's figure flashed before vanishing into thin air. "Senior brother. Master's asking about us too." "Senior brother." Duan Muyao angrily shouted a few times. Unfortunately, the only reply she got was silence. Flustered and exasperated, Duan Muyao turned back to glare at Han Yunqing before throwing herself into Grand Concubine Yi's arms. "Esteemed Imperial Concubine, senior brother's bullying me again." Sob sob. This counted as bullying. But if Long Fei Yi wasn't willing, why didn't he reject her outright? He'd never been a sloppy man. Han Yunqing mused that in a way, this counted as a form of bullying. Alright, don't cry. I'll definitely teach him a lesson later. Be good, Yao Yao's the most obedient. His Majesty and I will support you in your marriage alliance, so don't worry, Grand Concubine Yi comforted her. Han Yunqing only laughed coldly in her heart. Grand Concubine Yi, Grand Concubine Yi. In the end, she's the daughter-in-law you've chosen. So this time you won't oppose Emperor Tianhui? Hearing this, Duan Muyao stopped crying. I just knew esteemed imperial concubine was the best. Silly child, your senior brother never said he wouldn't marry, did he? Grand Concubine Yi smiled. Duan Muyao immediately lowered her head, her face red. I'll help you keep that jug of snow wine for now. When New Year's Eve comes, I'll bring it to the palace to open it. Grand Concubine Yi was even more patient with Duan Muyao than she was with Murong Wanru. Naturally, Long Fei Yi would attend a family banquet on New Year's Eve. Duan Muyao was waiting for Grand Concubine Yi's words. In other words, she could attend the banquet as well. Before leaving, Duan Muyao purposely drew close to Han Yunqing and murmured, "Esteemed Wang Fei, after New Year's, I'll have to ask for your guidance. Nothing's set in stone yet. Don't be happy too early." Han Yunqing wasn't to be outdone. "Let's wait and see." Duan Muyao replied cold. If not for Han Yunqing, she might have waited until her senior brother saw her good points and willingly married her. But Han Yunqing's existence gave her a deep sense of danger. No matter what, even if imperial father pressured her, she had to marry into the Duke of Qin's estate after New Year's. Chapter 161. After sending Duan Muyao off, Han Yunqing was about to go back when Grand Concubine Yi called her back. "Yunxi, come with me for a bit." Although Grand Concubine Yi spoke kindly, Han Yunqing knew nothing good would come of it. She lowered her head and followed her to the peony courtyard. Actually, she knew what Grand Concubine Yi wanted to say even before she spoke. The two of them sat down in the courtyard before Grand Concubine Yi dismissed Gui Mama. "Yunxi, did you go out with Fei just then?" Grand Concubine Yi asked. Ever since Han Yunqing moved into the hibiscus courtyard and wasn't chased out by Long Fei Yi, Grand Concubine Yi had formed some opinions in her heart. But before, she didn't mind her son's attitude and only wanted this girl to get the hell out of the Duke of Qin's estate. Now that she'd accepted her as a daughter-in-law, she had to keep an eye out for certain things. "No, we just happened to run into each other on the way back." Han Yunqing didn't know why she'd lied. Perhaps it was to cover up her previous lie, but she said she had an appointment tonight. Grand Concubine Yi nodded thoughtfully. If Han Yunqing had said yes, she wouldn't have believed it. After all, Fei might not reject this woman as much as before, but he couldn't treat her as an exception. In the past, Wanru had helped her ask around. The reason why Fei didn't reject this girl was because her poison skills were exceptional and useful. She'd been of great help to him. Han Yunqing had considerable skills, but compared to Fei, one was the mud on the ground while the other was the clouds in the sky. The two of them would never cross paths. In other words, Han Yunqing couldn't climb up the social ladder. Now that Wanru had no choice but to get married, Grand Concubine Yi considered Han Yunqing's acupuncture skills to be a good candidate. She could stay by her side and serve her for the rest of her life. If Fei could marry Yao Yao, then she wouldn't have any more requests. She'd just wait to hold a grandson. One daughter-in-law would stay by her side to serve her, while the other would give face to the Duke of Qin and the Duke of Qin's estate. At that time, she would let Han Yunqing move out of the hibiscus courtyard to live with her, and let Yao Yao live in the hibiscus courtyard. With her there, the two daughters-in-law would not make a big fuss. Moreover, Han Yunqing doesn't have any right to fight with Yao Yao. "Yunxi, what do you think of Princess Rongla's marriage alliance with the Duke of Qin's estate?" Grand Concubine Yi asked. Han Yunqing put on a fake smile and replied, "Imperial Mother and His Highness can decide on this matter." "Yunxi, You weren't very polite today, Grand Concubine Yi said directly. Was he trying to warn her about something by being so direct? Imperial Mother, Princess Rongla is of noble birth, and she came here because of the marriage alliance. Her status is special, so I naturally know the severity of the matter. Who knew that when Han Yunqing saw it, she would be so shocked that she would spit out the tea she'd just drank. Heavens! This prescription. No, to be more precise, this is a prescription for poison, okay? When little Yi saw Big Sis Yun's reaction, he timidly stuck out his tongue and obediently retreated to the side like a child who had gotten into trouble. Han Yunqing hurriedly picked up the prescription in the Han clan medical canon and compared it to little Yi's improved prescription. After comparing, she found that little Yi didn't change any of the ingredients. Instead, he adjusted the amount of the ingredients. Taking advantage of the mutual promotion and suppression of ingredients, when some ingredients were mixed together according to a certain ratio, new ingredients would be produced. Perhaps these ingredients would increase the efficacy of the medicine, or perhaps these ingredients would destroy the efficacy of the medicine, or even produce toxins. However, when these new ingredients were mixed together, they would have different effects. Speaking of which, the theory was relatively simple. However, the relationships within were inextricably linked and very complicated. It wasn't something that ordinary people could understand. Even a veteran like Han Yunqing wouldn't think that a prescription could be changed into a poison prescription if she didn't deliberately ponder over it. She didn't expect little Yi to actually change it like this. Who taught you this? Han Yunqing asked loudly. Little Yi was like a child who had done something wrong. His hands were tangled together as he lowered his head. Only then did Han Yunqing realize that she was too agitated. She hurriedly pulled little Yi to the side and sat him down. Calmly, she asked, Yi tell me, who taught you to change the prescription like this? I looked at it myself and suddenly thought of changing it, little Yi answered honestly. Han Yunqing was incredulous. She asked again, then how did you know the amount of the ingredients? Previously, Daddy had me memorize the ancient book on mutual promotion and suppression of ingredients. It was hundreds of pages thick. When I saw the prescription, I suddenly thought of changing it. Little Yi blinked his large eyes, looking especially pure and innocent. Han Yunqing knew that he wouldn't lie. However, wasn't this child's ability to understand everything too well? Do you know how to change anything else? Han Yunqing hurriedly asked again. I have to take a look and think about it. I spent an entire day thinking about that prescription just then. Little Yi was a little embarrassed, his little face red. However, he didn't know that it was already a heaven-defying ability for a 6-year-old to change a prescription into a poison one in a single day. Han Yunqing discovered that this child's talent in poisons was comparable to her own in the past. If he worked hard and studied hard, he'd definitely be a great figure in the future. She had to admit that Han Kongan had a good eye. That very day, Han Yunqing gave little Yi a few pointers on poison prescriptions. She told him to study hard and not tell anyone else about it for now. Little Yi was filled with motivation after receiving Big Sis Yun's affirmation. Apparently, little Chen Xiang said that he hadn't left his study for the past few days after Han Yunqing left. Day after day passed. Very soon, New Year's Eve arrived. All of Tianning's capital city was filled with festive festivities. On New Year's Eve, every family was reunited. The Empress Dowager had set up a family banquet for Grand Concubine Yi, His Highness Duke of Qin, and Murong Wanru every year. But this year, there was both Qin Wangfei and Princess Rongla. Murong Wanru was too ashamed to enter the palace after what happened to her, so Grand Concubine Yi didn't want to bring her along. Zhao Mama specially prepared Han Yunqing a short, red cotton-padded jacket with white fox fur lining the edges. It was warm and noble. Currently, she was helping Han Yunqing dress her up. Esteemed Wang Fei, this is your first time attending a family banquet on New Year's Eve. Actually, it's just a meal with everyone, so don't be too nervous. Han Yunqing wasn't nervous. She'd seen Emperor Tianhui, the Empress Dowager, and Empress before. She mused that since Princess Rongla was going tonight, Emperor Tianhui would probably express his intentions regarding the marriage alliance. Chapter 162. On New Year's Eve, the palace was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. The family banquet was held in the Empress Dowager's Peace and Wellness Palace. As Xiao Mama had said, it was just a New Year's Eve meal with everyone seated around the round table. However, on the dining table alone, a few people and a few mouths were enough to cause a lot of trouble. It was rare for the Empress Dowager and Grand Concubine Yi to sit together. Emperor Tianhui and Long Fei Yi sat on the Empress Dowager's left, followed by the Crown Prince and the other imperial princes. The Empress and Han Yunqing sat on Grand Concubine Yi's right. Han Yunqing wasn't very old, but she suddenly realized her seniority in the family. She used to be of the same generation as the Empress. Duanmu Yao sat next to Han Yunqing. The banquet had already begun, but Princess Changping still hadn't shown up. The mama said she was in one of the side rooms, preparing to give the Empress Dowager a New Year's gift and an unexpected surprise. This Changping sure knows how to dawdle, the Empress scolded unhappily. Let her be. I'm still waiting for her surprise, the Empress Dowager said with a chuckle. Grand Concubine Yi's lips rose to a cold, disdainful smile. She silently picked up food without speaking. Naturally, it wasn't good to talk about what happened at the plum blossom meet at this banquet, especially when it was her Murong Wanru who'd lost face. Eunuch Li had been sentenced to death by the Empress for neglecting his duties, which counted as an explanation to Grand Concubine Yi. Long Fei Yi and Emperor Tianhui were whispering to each other on the sidelines, but no one dared to disturb them out of curiosity. After all, the private conversations between these two brothers couldn't be trivial matters. A family banquet was nothing more than a gathering of the whole family. The elders would show concern for the younger generation while the younger generation would ask after their health. The Empress Dowager had a hall full of grandchildren. She asked about this and that, her face wreathed in smiles and her mood excellent. Occasionally, she'd exchange a few words with Grand Concubine Yi, who didn't have a single grandchild to hold. Although she smiled in reply, it didn't reach her eyes. Soon enough, the Empress Dowager's attention rested on Princess Rongla. Actually, both the Empress Dowager and Empress were eager to see Princess Rongla marry Long Tianma. Unfortunately, her thoughts were all on the Duke of Qin. The marriage alliance wasn't a child's play, nor was it a matter between the two clans. It was an important matter between the two countries and involved the cooperation between Tianning country and Western Zhou, especially when it came to war. Thus, even if the Empress Dowager and Empress were unwilling, they didn't dare to interfere. From Emperor Tianhui's perspective, they still hoped that the Duke of Qin would agree to the marriage. Princess Rongla, please don't stand on ceremony. Men, quickly pour some wine for Princess Rongla. The Empress Dowager is too polite. Yao Yao can do it herself. The Empress Dowager had taken good care of Duanmu Yao, so Duanmu Yao had long heard that Grand Concubine Yi and the Empress Dowager were on bad terms. Naturally, she didn't dare to get too close to the Empress Dowager in front of Grand Concubine Yi, but she didn't lose her manners or dignity. Yao Yao, come and eat more. Imperial Concubine Dowager, Yao Yao doesn't deserve it. Yao Yao should be the one picking up food for you. Grand Concubine personally picked up food for Duanmu Yao while Duanmu Yao ladled soup for her. The two of them weren't mother and daughter-in-law yet, but they were more like mother and daughter. Logically speaking, Han Yunqing should be the center of attention at this year's New Year's Eve family banquet, but Han Yunqing had been given the cold shoulder since the start of the banquet. It was as if the liveliness at the table didn't belong to her at all. She was quite at ease as she quietly ate her meal and listened to their conversation. She could hear the truth and lies in their words clearly. The Empress Dowager glanced at her before finally speaking. Yunxi, is there any news? News? Han Yunqing raised her head with a blank expression. What news? But Grand Concubine Yi's expression turned gloomy. Muhu, it looks like there's none. Look at her reaction, she probably doesn't know what you're asking for. She's already married, but she's still acting like a servant girl, the Empress teased. Han Yunqing really didn't understand. Why was she suddenly asking if there was any news? What news? Seeing her expression, the Empress Dowager immediately laughed out loud. She tilted her head towards Grand Concubine Yi. Little sister, this girl of yours, is she pretending not to understand, or is she really that clueless? Haven't you taught her anything? Grand Concubine Yi sighed softly with emotion. They've only been married for half a year. The Duke of Qin is busy every day and hasn't shown up for days. How could there be news so quickly? At this, Han Yunqing finally understood what "there's news" meant. The Empress Dowager was asking if she was pregnant or not. Embarrassed, she lowered her head, her cheeks flushing red. Long Fei Yi and her were only together in name. Even the red on their wedding night was fake, so how could there be news from her stomach? So there's really no news? The Empress Dowager asked while knowing the answer. She even put on a serious face. Grand Concubine Yi didn't want to answer. She shot a cold glance at Han Yunqing, indicating for her to respond on her own. There's news, and the red on the white handkerchief shared the same logic. They didn't ask about the process, only the results. Although both sides needed to work hard, if there were no results, then the blame would be pushed onto the female side. If he didn't speak up today, the issue of having news would continue to trouble Han Yunqing in the future. But now that he did, many of the people present would restrain themselves. With her son's personality, how could he be willing to help Han Yunqing like this? Grand Concubine Yi found it harder and harder to see through him. Emperor Tianhui looked at Han Yunqing a few times before a complicated look flashed past his eyes. Then he opened his mouth and teased, Duke of Qin, you only have one Wang Fei in your estate, but you're already giving her the cold shoulder. Wait until the new year is over. You can't do this again if a new person enters the family. After the new year, a new person would enter. Wasn't this talking about the marriage for peace? Wasn't that Duan Muyao? This was probably the first time Emperor Tianhui had brought up the matter of marriage in public. Although his words were reserved, everyone present understood what he meant. Duan Muyao had come to the family banquet and Emperor Tianhui's words meant that the recent rumors were true. It was highly likely that the marriage alliance was a done deal. Long Tianma picked up a cup of wine and downed it in one gulp. Others might not be able to see through it, but he could. Grand Concubine Yi bringing Duan Muyao to the family banquet and his imperial father asking in public was actually the two of them working together to put pressure on the Duke of Qin. They were forcing him to have no room to refuse. It looked like this was a foregone conclusion. It was one thing if he couldn't marry the woman he liked, but he didn't expect that he couldn't marry the woman he didn't like either. Thinking up to here, he poured himself another cup of wine. A foregone conclusion was a foregone conclusion. Everyone still hoped that His Highness Duke of Qin would answer the question himself. Duan Muyao's gloomy mood turned nervous, her face pink as she waited for Long Fei Yi to speak. At the same time, Han Yunqing's cheeks were still red as she waited. She looked towards Long Fei Yi again, only to meet Long Fei Yi's deep gaze just like before. He was looking at her again. Han Yunqing wanted to avoid his gaze again, but for some reason, she didn't. Instead, she stared straight at him and waited. Everyone said that when one's eyes met, it was a silent exchange of words. Han Yunqing didn't have anything to say to Long Fei Yi, but Long Fei Yi's lips quirked up slightly at the sight of her serious gaze. As everyone waited in silence, he said, your lordship doesn't even have time to attend to a Wangfei, so there's no need for a newbie. As soon as these words came out, it was like a sudden clap of thunder that hit the banquet table, shocking everyone to the point that their hearts almost stopped. Long Fei Yi, what did he just say? Emperor Tianhui's expression gradually changed into a storm, while Grand Concubine Yi glared fiercely at him. Chapter 163. Long Fei Ye's words angered Duanmu Yao into leaving, completely destroying the harmonious atmosphere of the banquet. In the silence, Emperor Tianhui slapped the table and rose to his feet with a loud bang. Everyone present, including the Empress Dowager and Empress, subconsciously held their breaths. Duke of Qin, come with Zhen. Emperor Tianhui's face was black as he spoke coldly. Long Fei Ye's expression didn't change as he rose to his feet and followed behind Emperor Tianhui. It wasn't until the two figures had vanished from sight that the crowd broke into an uproar. Long Fei Yi had used the excuse of not having time to reject Duanmu Yao. Although it had nothing to do with Han Yunqing, the Duke of Qin's answer that he had news of Han Yunqing still made everyone talk about her. Without a doubt, the Duke of Qin's rejection was great news for Han Yunqing. If Duanmu Yao couldn't enter the Duke of Qin's estate, then Han Yunqing would be able to secure her throne as esteemed Wangfei. Han Yunqing's really lucky. The Duke of Qin was still young when the Empress Dowager arranged the marriage. If it were today, he'd probably be rejected as well. That's hard to say. Didn't you hear the Duke of Qin's words just then? It's obvious that he's visited her before. I heard Han Yunqing lives in the Duke of Qin's hibiscus courtyard. That doesn't prove anything. I just don't believe that woman could catch the Duke of Qin's eye. Doesn't she just know a bit of poison skills? That's not all. Didn't you hear about what happened at the Plum Blossom meet? Even Princess Rongla admitted defeat. As I see it, this esteemed Wangfei isn't as simple as she seems. Although there were different opinions, the rumors of Han Yunqing being favored had spread from this banquet. Amidst the discussion, Han Yunqing had long slipped away and found a court lady to take her to clean up the stains on her robes. Soon after she left, the Empress Dowager asked, "Where's Qin Wangfei?" To reply esteemed Empress Dowager, esteemed Wangfei went to clean up the stains on her robes. Su Mama accompanied her, the court lady reported. A complicated look flashed across the Empress Dowager's eyes, but she didn't say anything. Of course the Empress Dowager had heard of the events at the Plum Blossom meet as well. She had a love-hate relationship with that girl Han Yunqing. She'd originally thought that if Duanmu Yao went to the Duke of Qin's estate, Grand Concubine Yi's personality would definitely make things difficult for Han Yunqing. Then she'd have a chance to rope in Han Yunqing. But who knew that something like this would happen? The Duke of Qin actually made things difficult for Princess Rongla in public. If news of this reached the ears of Western Zhou's imperial family, what would they do? The Empress Dowager furrowed her brows and was deeply worried. The Empress hesitated for a moment and advised in a low voice, "Mufei, I think there's still hope." "What do you mean?" The Empress Dowager asked casually without much hope. "Mufei, didn't the Duke of Qin refuse multiple times when His Majesty urged us to get married? In the end, His Majesty issued an imperial edict. Wouldn't the Duke of Qin and Grand Concubine Yi submit obediently?" The Empress lowered her voice. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager's brows relaxed. She would have forgotten about the matter if the Empress hadn't mentioned it. But on second thought, she felt that something was wrong and said unhappily, "Empress, how can Han Yunqing be mentioned in the same breath as Princess Rongla? I don't even know if Grand Concubine Yi can persuade her. Let's go take a look as well." Han Yunqing had no sense of shame or self-respect. She opened the sedan door and walked into the Duke of Qin's estate on her own. Princess Rongla was the princess of a great country. She was already compromising herself to the Duke of Qin, so how could she still force a marriage? Wouldn't that turn Western Zhou's imperial family into the laughingstock of the world? The Empress rose to accompany her. Muhu, Princess Rongla is the Duke of Qin's junior sister. Although they aren't childhood sweethearts, they've known each other since they were young. As Qinxie sees it, as long as the Duke of Qin agrees, Princess Rongla will forgive today's events. Later, Qinxie will warn everyone not to speak of tonight's events to anyone. Only then did the Empress Dowager nod her head and head east with the Empress. At the same time, Han Yunqing was in the West Wing taking care of her clothes. In the brightly lit room, she discovered that a large bowl of soup had spilled all over her body. No matter how she wiped it off, she couldn't get it clean. Fortunately, she'd prepared extra clothes for the banquet. "Su Mama, help me get a new set of clothes." "Esteemed Wang Fei, please wait a moment. This old servant will come right away." "No rush. I'm tired, so I'm planning to rest a bit." Su Mama closed the door and retreated, leaving Han Yunqing leaning lazily on the bed. She wasn't tired, but she was using an excuse. There was no point in going over now. She guessed that Long Fei Yi and Grand Concubine Yi wouldn't be able to leave so easily tonight. After changing her clothes, she'd go back. In any case, there was nothing for her to do. Thinking about it, Long Fei Yi had only said a few words at the banquet tonight, but they'd caused a huge uproar. She didn't know how Emperor Tianhui would deal with him, but if that fellow dared to do so, he must have 100% confidence in his abilities. Han Yunqing didn't even realize that her lips were curled up the entire time. She was in a very good mood. While she was secretly rejoicing, she suddenly heard a series of crashing sounds from the next room. It sounded like something had broken into pieces. "What's going on?" Han Yunqing stood up and listened carefully, but didn't hear anything else. Strange. She didn't think much of it, but quickly rose to her feet to see what was going on. But as soon as she opened the door, she saw that a large wall of decorations had toppled over. Precious ornaments were scattered all over the floor, and Princess Changping was lying in the midst of the debris with her back facing up. It wasn't clear where she'd been injured, but she was bleeding profusely. "Changping!" Han Yunqing cried out in alarm. Her first reaction was to rush over to save her. Although she and Changping had a deep grudge against each other, this was a matter of life and death. How could she care so much? She quickly turned Princess Changping over, only to see that her forehead was bleeding profusely. Her eyes were tightly shut, as if she'd fallen asleep. Han Yunqing was about to stop the bleeding when the detox system suddenly gave her a warning. Poison. Didn't she fall? Could it be that she fell down after being poisoned? How could she be poisoned? Who poisoned her? The fact that the detox system didn't report the poison immediately proved that Princess Changping's poison wasn't simple. Han Yunqing didn't have time to think and immediately activated the scanning system. But as soon as she did, she froze. Her face was ashen white as her hands holding Princess Changping began to tremble uncontrollably. The scanning system gave her a warning. This was a corpse. Thus, the scanning system automatically activated its corpse scanning mode. She was holding a corpse, which meant Princess Changping was dead. Ah! Han Yunqing screamed, subconsciously pushing Princess Changping away. She hurriedly got up and retreated several steps in disbelief. As a doctor, she was used to seeing life and death. Corpses weren't scary to her. But this was Princess Changping. The same Princess Changping who'd been alive and kicking just a few days ago. She'd actually died. Poisoned to death. Han Yunqing hadn't expected this at all. Thus, she'd rushed in to save Princess Changping and hadn't noticed anything strange. How could this be? Otherwise, as a doctor, she'd be very sensitive to this kind of thing. This matter was too sudden. Han Yunqing's mind was blank for a moment. At this moment, a palace maid's voice came from outside the door. "Princess, the things you wanted have been found." Princess, you still haven't finished. Hurry, something happened at the family banquet. Why don't you go take a look? This was the voice of Princess Changping's personal maid, Shuang Hong. Han Yunqing subconsciously turned to look outside the door and saw Shuang Hong running in. She stopped in her tracks, stunned. The two looked at each other. After a while, Shuang Hong suddenly screamed, "Ah! Someone come! Ah! Someone come quickly!" Han Yunqing stood there in a daze. She didn't think too much about it, her heart thumping wildly. Shuang Hong shouted as she rushed in, picking up Princess Changping. However, as soon as she picked her up, Shuang Hong sensed that something was wrong. Her hands trembled as she checked Princess Changping's breathing. She was so frightened that she immediately pushed Princess Changping away, screaming, "Ah, ah, the princess is dead. Dead!" At this time, a large group of palace maids and eunuchs all came. Seeing the scene in the room, everyone panicked and retreated. Their faces were all pale. Only an old mama was still calm. She sent people to find the imperial physician and also sent people to report to the Empress Dowager and the Empress. The first imperial physician to arrive was Gu Beiyue. As soon as he arrived, he saw the scene in the room and Han Yunqing standing to the side. A trace of unease flashed through his eyes. When Shuang Hong saw Gu Beiyue, she rushed over as if she had seen her savior. "Imperial physician Gu, the princess, Wu Wu, hurry and save the princess. She's definitely not dead. She's definitely not dead." He didn't know if Shuang Hong was scared out of her wits or just deceiving herself. Once a person stopped breathing, they would change very quickly. Princess Changping was lying on the ground, her forehead a bloody mess. Her eyes were tightly shut and her body was stiff. Her face and lips were pale. Gu Beiyue could tell at a glance that there was no hope. He still went forward and seriously checked her breathing, pulse, and cause of death. At this moment, the people surrounding the door scattered. The Empress Dowager, Empress, and Long Tianma arrived. "Changping! Changping!" The Empress rushed in. As soon as she saw the person lying on the ground, her vision darkened and she almost collapsed. Fortunately, Long Tianma caught her in time. The Empress Dowager walked in with the help of a mama. Her face was completely pale and her body was trembling. She couldn't even stand properly. Long Tianma saw all of this and was both angry and shocked. He violently roared, "Gu Beiyue, what exactly happened?" Gu Beiyue lowered his eyes and retreated to the side with a bow. He directly knelt down. "Esteemed Empress Dowager, esteemed Empress, His Highness the Crown Prince, please restrain your grief." "What?" the Empress Dowager exclaimed. She couldn't breathe and her eyes were wide open. "No, no. It can't be. It can't be. You're talking nonsense. Nonsense." The Empress gave Gu Beiyue a hard shove with her foot and ordered, "Hurry and save her, save her. If you can't save her, I'll bury you with her." Gu Beiyue knelt again, his voice heavy. "Esteemed Empress, restrain your grief. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Changping, my daughter, ah. My daughter, ah." The Empress immediately burst into tears. She broke free from Long Tianma and rushed over. She hugged Princess Changping and pushed her with all her strength, but she was indeed dead. "No. Changping, how could you abandon Mufei? Changping, what exactly happened? My daughter, ah. My daughter, ah, Wu Wu." In a moment, everyone outside the room knelt down. The Empress's heart-wrenching cries could be heard. Long Tianma looked at his own sister in disbelief. He sternly asked, "Gu Beiyue, she was perfectly fine. How could she die?" "She was dead, but what was the cause of death? The wound on her forehead couldn't have been fatal." Chapter 164. Cause of Death. Gu Beiyue glanced at Han Yunqing from the corner of his eyes. Under everyone's gaze, he answered truthfully, reporting to your highness, if this official's diagnosis is correct, Princess Changping should have been poisoned to death. As for what poison it was, please forgive this official's incompetence. If Princess Changping was still alive, perhaps Gu Beiyue wouldn't have been able to find any traces of poison. However, once a person died, the traces of poison would appear in a short period of time. Princess Changping's pale lips had a few black stains. If more time passed, the traces of poison would become even more obvious. Perhaps it would be possible to find out what poison it was. Poison. Once these words were said, everyone was shocked. She was actually poisoned. What kind of poison? Who poisoned her? Long Tianma suddenly roared at Shuanghong, speak. What exactly happened? Why are you and the princess locked up here? Changping should have already attended the family banquet, but she was acting mysteriously and didn't appear. Shuanghong was scared silly and shook her head. This servant didn't. Suddenly, she turned to look at Han Yunqing and pointed at Han Yunqing. It's her. It's her, Qin Wangfei, she. At this time, the Empress Dowager and Empress finally noticed Han Yunqing on the side. Her Highness the Princess said she wanted to prepare a gift for the Empress Dowager. Because she hadn't finished carving, she hid here to carve. She just had this servant go out to get something. When this servant came back, I saw the princess lying on the ground with esteemed Wangfei on the side. Shuanghong was so scared that she began to cry. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager and Empress both looked at Han Yunqing. Their gazes were sinister as if they had been poisoned. Han Yunqing immediately realized that she was in big trouble. She had been focused on saving people and had been shocked by this matter. She hadn't realized the danger she was in yet. However, she was still calm and explained, I was just preparing to change next door when I heard a commotion. When I came to take a look, I saw Changping lying on the ground. What kind of poison was she poisoned with? Why would she suddenly be poisoned? Where did the poison come from? The Empress was paralyzed on the ground and asked again and again. Her voice was very sharp, as if she wanted to tear Han Yunqing apart. As for the Empress Dowager, she was even more direct. Why did Changping fall to the ground? Why did these shelves fall? Han Yunqing, did you quarrel with Changping and even hit her? Tell me. I didn't. Han Yunqing denied angrily. I'll say it again. I was just next door. I heard the sound of the shelf falling and came over. When I entered, I saw Changping lying on the ground. When I found out that she was poisoned, Shuanghong came over. What kind of poison did she get? Aren't you very good at detoxification? Why didn't you save her? Why? Long Tianma was also very excited. After all, Changping was his only sister. I haven't found out what kind of poison she was poisoned with, but when I came, she was already dead. There was no way to save her, Han Yunqing explained truthfully. As soon as she said that, the Empress immediately rebuked her, Han Yunqing, you're lying. How long would it take for you to come over from next door? How could you not have time to save her? What kind of poison could be so powerful that it could kill immediately? This point was also what Han Yunqing couldn't understand. However, her attitude was still very firm. I'm not lying. As for what exactly happened, we'll only know after we find the poison. I'll immediately do the examination. All she saw was the result. Whether Princess Changping had died before the shelf fell or after her death, no one could say for sure. There weren't many poisons that could kill immediately. Han Yunqing also wanted to know. What she wanted to know even more was where this poison came from. She was just about to walk over when the Empress's anger reached the heavens. Han Yunqing, you still dare to quibble. You're lying. Someone come, arrest her for this consort. Han Yunqing suddenly frowned, also angry. Who dares? Without evidence, why should I be arrested? Someone come, arrest her. The Empress Dowager's voice became even sharper. Very quickly, the guards rushed in and detained Han Yunqing. Han Yunqing couldn't break free. She angrily glared at Long Tianma. Your Highness Crown Prince, you don't even know what kind of poison Changping was poisoned with. Without any evidence, you're making slanderous accusations. Is this how the palace does things? Long Tianma was angry and sorrowful, but he still wasn't willing to believe that Han Yunqing had poisoned Changping to death. He also couldn't think of any motive for Han Yunqing to commit the crime. After hesitating for a moment, he said, Imperial Grandmother, Imperial Mother, there's no harm in letting Imperial Aunt Qin check the poison. The Empress was very repulsed. Just as she was about to refuse, the Empress Dowager coldly said, Fine, let her check. Aijia wants to see what kind of poison she can find that can kill instantly. Only after these words were spoken did the guards release Han Yunqing. Han Yunqing crouched down beside Princess Changping. As soon as she saw the black strands on her tongue, she was puzzled. She did a routine check while activating the scanning system. However, the results were outside of her expectations. How could it be? Are you done? The Empress sternly urged. Han Yunqing stood up and looked around, her face full of confusion. Did you find it? The Empress Dowager impatiently asked. Han Yunqing indifferently said, I found it. It's arrow poison wood. However, when these words came out, everyone in the room was at a loss. What was arrow poison wood? They'd never heard of it before. What is this? The Empress Dowager sternly asked. This is an extremely poisonous tree. It's commonly known as throat upon contact with blood. As long as there's a wound on the body and it's stained with its sap, the victim will quickly be poisoned. It'll cause heart failure, making it difficult to breathe and suffocate to death, Han Yunqing explained. Regarding this poison, there was another saying, 7 up, 8 down, 9 down, which was precisely what throat upon contact with blood meant. If you took 7 steps up, 8 steps down, or 9 steps on flat ground, you'd fall to the ground and die. Actually, depending on the amount of poison, sometimes you didn't need to take that many steps. You'd fall to the ground after just 2 or 3 steps. Han Yunqing was basically certain. Princess Changping should have fallen after being poisoned, which was why she bumped into this frame. There were only 2 kinds of poisons. One was accidentally touched, and the other was intentionally poisoned. She'd looked around earlier, but hadn't seen any branches or leaves of the arrow poison wood. She also hadn't found anything with this kind of poison. Could it be that someone had come to poison her, and she hadn't seen them when she'd come over? This matter was somewhat complicated. Just as she was about to do a more detailed examination to analyze the poison in Princess Changping's body, the Empress sternly said, Someone come, immediately take her to the imperial prison. The culprit must be her. There's nothing to say. Han Yunqing once again looked towards Long Tianma. Let me investigate clearly. This kind of poison is very rare. Not everyone can recognize it. Who knew that the Empress would actually bite back? It's indeed rare. No one here has ever heard of it. Only you, Han Yunqing, know of it. Apart from you, Han Yunqing, who else would be able to poison her? The Empress wasn't wrong. At least in the palace, only Han Yunqing was able to poison her. What if an assassin broke in and poisoned Princess Changping? Empress, you can doubt me, but please take out evidence. Han Yunqing argued. Assassin? Why would there be an assassin out of nowhere? What kind of place do you think the palace is? Do you think assassins can casually enter? Who saw an assassin? The only person Shuang Hong saw was you. Also, who told you to come here to change clothes? Why was it so coincidental that you were next to Changping? You and Changping have always been on bad terms. You must have harbored hatred towards Changping and wanted to poison her. Shuang Hong saw it, so she twisted her words. Han Yunqing, Han Yunqing, I didn't think your heart would be so vicious. To think that I thought you were Tian Mo's savior, I really misjudged you. The Empress' tears flowed freely. She was so aggressive that she almost made a move. Han Yunqing didn't know how to argue with her. How could someone twist her words like this? She took a deep breath and said, Su Mama can testify. It was Su Mama who brought me here to change clothes. But it was at this moment that Su Mama rushed in from the doorway with Han Yunqing's new clothes in her hands. To reply, esteemed Empress Dowager, esteemed Empress, it really was this servant who brought esteemed Wang Fei here. But when this servant went to get the clothes just then, I don't know what happened either. Su Mama's second half of the sentence was simply adding frost to snow. Han Yunqing sucked in a cold breath. She was about to explain when the Empress Dowager coldly said, at that time, your Han family's Li Shi was right. The best detoxifier is also the most terrifying poisoner. Someone come, immediately take this murderer to the imperial prison. Without Aijia's orders, no one is allowed to visit. Han Yunqing frowned and looked towards Long Tianma. However, this time, Long Tianma was also silent. Han Yunqing was thoroughly disappointed. She really wasted her efforts in saving Long Tianma. I want to see the Duke of Qin, she said coldly. Who knew that the Empress Dowager's voice would be even colder? It's no use even if the Duke of Qin comes. Han Yunqing, you can't be forgiven for poisoning the princess. No one can protect you. Without giving Han Yunqing a chance to struggle, the guards dragged Han Yunqing outside. Han Yunqing shouted, Empress Dowager, you'll regret this. It's fine if you lock me up, but if you miss the source of the poison, more people will die from this poison. If the source of the poison was in the palace, then both the poisoned objects and the poisoned assassins would be in danger. Unfortunately, all she got in response was the Empress and her servant girls' sorrowful cries. Nobody listened to her words. Currently, Grand Concubine Yi was comforting Duan Muyao. Long Fei Yi and Emperor Tianhui were locked up in the imperial study, so they had no idea what had happened. The Empress hugged Princess Changping's corpse, heartbroken. Long Tianma stood guard on one side, unable to coax her out of it. The Empress Dowager sat on one side, knitting her brows as she sighed again and again. She was so sad that she didn't know how to face reality. Changping was the granddaughter she doted on the most. Suddenly, the Empress raised her head, agitated. Muhu, kill Han Yunqing to avenge Changping. You have to kill her. Muhu, she wasn't stupid enough to poison Changping. This matter, before Long Tianma could finish, the Empress slapped him across the face. You traitor. Your little sister's already dead. You can still say things like that? Long Tianma was resentful, but didn't talk back. The Empress was so agitated that she wanted to say more, but before she could open her mouth, her eyes gave a start before she fainted. Muhu. Long Tianma was alarmed. Gu Beiyue hurried forward to take her pulse. Empress Dowager, Your Highness, esteemed Empress has been provoked. Her anger has attacked her heart, causing her qi and blood to be unstable. She must stay in bed and rest well. Don't let her suffer any more blows, Gu Beiyue said as he wrote a prescription and had a court lady fetch the medicine. After the Empress was sent away, the Empress Dowager glanced at Long Tianma and said, Tianma, take care of Changping's funeral. So speaking, she looked towards the door. Someone come, report to His Majesty that Princess Changping is gone. As soon as she finished, she burst into tears. Words for the readers, add Ji Mo's WeChat account as Gu Beiyue. You can see Gu Beiyue's descriptions. Ji Mo's WeChat account, Jimomo 2015. Chapter 165. This was Han Yunqing's second time in prison. However, this time was different from the previous time. This time, she was directly locked up in a small dark room. Once the iron door was shut, the room was so dark that she couldn't even see her fingers in front of her. She had no idea how big the room was, or what was inside, or who was inside. Darkness represented the unknown. Even the boldest person would feel fear. It would be a lie to say she wasn't afraid. Han Yunqing forced herself to feel her way to the wall, where she sat down and curled up into a ball. It was almost dawn outside, so what was the situation in the palace? Did Grand Concubine Yi and Long Fei Yi know something had happened to her? What were their attitudes? What was Emperor Tianhui's attitude? When would they interrogate her? Who would interrogate her? Han Yunqing waited uneasily, but she ended up waiting for 3 days and 3 nights. During these 3 days and 3 nights, the jailers only brought her water at regular intervals. There was no food, and no one came to see her. No news at all was the best news, but to Han Yunqing, the unknown was even more terrifying than a room of darkness. Han Yunqing grew more and more uneasy. She hadn't had time to analyze the poison in Princess Changping's body, so there was no way to make any guesses. The only thing she knew was that this wasn't a trap. No one in the palace would dare to use Princess Changping's life to frame her, so there were only 2 possibilities. One was that an assassin had poisoned her, and the other was that Princess Changping's wounds had touched something poisonous. To get to the bottom of this, she'd have to start with the poison in the body. But she didn't even have a chance to explain herself. If this dragged on, the poison in the body would change. If they couldn't find anything, wouldn't she have to take the blame as the biggest suspect? Thinking up to here, Han Yunqing immediately went to knock on the door. The banging was loud, but no one paid her any attention. Who would have thought that after this, even the people who delivered water did not come? Another 2 days and 2 nights passed. Han Yunqing finally felt afraid. She curled up in a dark corner, thirsty and hungry. Her entire body was cold, and her heart chilled. Just what was the situation outside? Did no one really care about her anymore? Han Yunqing knew that only Grand Concubine Yi and Long Fei Yi could save her now. She didn't place any hopes on Grand Concubine Yi, but Long Fei Yi. Where is he now? What is he doing? Even he could not save her. Or, did he not intend to save them? Long Fei Yi's shocking words from the New Year's Eve banquet were still ringing in her ears. She had to admit that she was looking forward to it. Finally, on the morning of the 5th day, the iron gate was opened. When the light shone in from the outside, Han Yunqing immediately stood up. No matter how dazzling the light was, she did not close her eyes. The light represented hope, but who knew that what she saw was a hideous and terrifying face covered in tears? The Empress. Several guards came in with lanterns and hung them up. Soon, the whole room was lit up. At this time, Han Yunqing could see the things in the room clearly. There was nothing in the room except for a giant iron pot large enough to hold a grown man. Beneath the pot was a pile of firewood. Han Yunqing only glanced at it before her gaze rested on the Empress. The people she had brought were all guards, not jailers. It looked like the justice courts had all been sent away. When the Empress walked in, the guards immediately stepped forward to detain Han Yunqing. Han Yunqing's lips rose to a bitter smile, but she didn't struggle. She'd waited for 5 days before the Empress arrived. She knew she was doomed. Han Yunqing, Changping hasn't been placed in the coffin yet. The Empress's tone was lifeless and unsettling. The cause of death is still unknown. If she's casually placed in the coffin, Changping won't be able to rest in peace. Han Yunqing's tone was flat as well. She thought that if the Empress hadn't been placed in the coffin after 5 days, then at least the true culprit was still unknown. She still had hope. Unexpectedly, the Empress suddenly flew into a rage and rushed over to slap Han Yunqing twice. It's all because of you. If you don't die, Changping won't be able to rest in peace. Han Yunqing's hands were bound and she couldn't move. She turned her face to the side and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her gaze was like a knife as she glared at the Empress. I'll say it one last time. Changping wasn't killed by me. It was you who killed her. It was you who poisoned her. The Empress rebuked as she retreated. She angrily ordered, "Come, immediately light the fire. Ben Gong must make this slut confess today." Light the fire. Han Yunqing looked back and saw the guards light the firewood under the big iron pot. Then they began to pour oil inside. What were they planning to do? If the Empress wanted to extort a confession, shouldn't she be taken to the torture chamber? What was the point of burning oil? The more Han Yunqing looked, the more uneasy she felt. She looked at the Empress, but the Empress only smiled coldly at her. Han Yunqing felt that there was something wrong with the Empress' mental state. She was like a lunatic. What exactly do you want to do? Han Yunqing asked loudly. The Empress sneered and looked at her from above, not replying. Finally, the oil in the big iron pot behind her began to boil. The heat emitted, causing the room's temperature and humidity to rise. The smell of oil and smoke in the air became heavier and heavier, making people feel nauseous. Han Yunqing looked and looked. She seemed to have thought of something. Her face gradually paled and she shook her head. Come, hang her up. The Empress finally spoke. This time, Han Yunqing completely understood. Unexpectedly, Han Yunqing suddenly opened her eyes and fiercely glared at the Empress. She angrily replied, I won't confess. I didn't do it. You wronged me, you tortured me to extort a confession. It was you who caused Changping to die without knowing why, dying with everlasting regret. You won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of your life. Han Yunqing, you're courting death. The Empress was also angry. The rope in her hand began to lower bit by bit. However, this time, Han Yunqing did not struggle or curl up her body. She dared to confess to something she had done, no matter how big it was. She would never confess to something she had never done. She silently looked at the scalding hot oil, a heroic smile blossoming on her lips. It was poignant and beautiful. Whether she confessed or not, she would die anyway. Why should she compromise and break her pride? Why not die in a more open and unrestrained manner? Some principles, some honor, could not be put down no matter what. As the rope was lowered bit by bit, the hanging hem of her skirt began to feel heavy. The hem of her skirt had already stuck to the hot oil and would soon reach her calf. She told herself, Han Yunqing, you're brave. Han Yunqing, you're good. This one will let you have a taste of your calf being fried. The Empress was furious and suddenly lowered the rope. It fell instantly. However, at this critical moment, a figure suddenly flew in like an arrow. Thump! Han Yunqing's falling body came to an abrupt stop, and then her whole body was pulled up. Han Yunqing immediately opened her eyes and saw Long Feiyi standing on the edge of the big oil pan. One hand was holding the rope above her head, the other hand was behind her back. He was dressed in white and stood tall and straight like a pine tree, but also like an immortal. His cold face was as calm as ever, but those deep eyes contained monstrous anger. Long Feiyi, you must be my guardian angel, right? Long Feiyi, 5 days. I've finally waited for you. The frightened Han Yunqing inexplicably smiled, not even noticing that the corners of her eyes were wet. No one expected Long Feiyi to appear at this time. The Empress was the most shocked. She released the rope and retreated to the wall. How did Long Feiyi get in? The Empress Dowager had already issued a ban. Without her permission, no one was allowed to visit. Today, she came over not only to inform the Empress Dowager, but also to inform the Emperor. Although there wasn't enough evidence to prove that the culprit was Han Yunqing, the Emperor had hinted several times that Han Yunqing was the most suspicious. If they couldn't find any evidence, they could only interrogate Han Yunqing. Because of Madame Li's last words, the emperor had long regarded Han Yunqing and the Duke of Qin as thorns in his side. If he couldn't get rid of the Duke of Qin, he had to at least kill Han Yunqing first. The empress, who had calmed down, immediately asked, "Duke of Qin, without the Empress Dowager's imperial decree, who allowed you to come in?" Long Feiyi retorted, "Empress, who allowed you to use torture to extort a confession?" So speaking, he scooped Han Yunqing into his arms and pulled her into the frying pan. Chapter 166. Because of Long Feiyi's question, the empress was speechless for a long time. The room was silent. Long Fei carried Han Yunqing down from the towering cauldron. It wasn't clear whether it was because she'd been curled up for too long or because she was still afraid, but Han Yunqing's legs turned weak as soon as they touched the ground. She couldn't stand straight and fell straight into Long Fei's body. Of course, she wanted to get up immediately. She knew that this guy was very misophobic and especially hated this kind of behavior. However, Long Feiyi hugged her waist and said in a low voice, "Don't move." This time, Han Yunqing immediately froze. Although his voice was still very cold, Han Yunqing liked those two words. She obediently didn't move and leaned in his arms. Gradually, she felt his exclusive scent completely enveloping her. In an instant, all her fear disappeared. Unknowingly, she relaxed and put all her weight in his arms. And Long Feiyi lowered his head and lowered his cold eyes. He carefully lifted the corner of her skirt and tore off the part that was covered in hot oil. At this time, Han Yunqing noticed that a large part of her skirt was wet. If it accidentally stuck to her calf, with the temperature of the hot oil, it would definitely burn her skin. After Long Feiyi tore off a few pieces of her skirt, he checked other places one by one. Looking at his serious side profile, Han Yunqing was stunned. She forgot where she was. In her eyes and mind, there was only this man's silent and cold face, but his considerate and meticulous actions. She couldn't imagine that this big ice block could have such a meticulous side. Was she dreaming? Big ice block, if this is a dream, then, can I fall in love with you in a dream? After confirming that there were no oil stains on Han Yunqing's skirt, Long Feiyi immediately pushed her away. He was still as cold and concise as ever. Stand properly. Ah. Okay, this push immediately shattered all of Han Yunqing's beautiful dreams. Falling in love with him was simply asking for trouble. How was that possible? Her legs felt like jelly, but she still managed to stand firm on her own. After exhaling, she immediately complained, "Your Highness, I'm innocent. The Empress forced me to confess. She said that if I didn't confess, she would burn me to death." The Empress was caught red-handed and couldn't defend herself. Coldly, she glared at Han Yunqing and clenched her fists. "Empress, you're in such a hurry to beat him into a confession. Could it be that you have some unspeakable reason?" Long Feiyi asked. "I didn't. Han Yunqing was the murderer. Only she knew how to poison him. It must be her." The Empress roared angrily, completely forgetting herself. Long Feiyi didn't plan on wasting words with the Empress. Coldly, he said, "This prince is following the Emperor's orders to bring Han Yunqing out of prison and assist in the investigation of Princess Changping's death." Everyone guessed that the Empress had steeled her heart to kill Qin Wangfei. Last night, the Empress had ordered her to dispose of something wrapped up tightly. It wasn't big, but it was very heavy. Even Qian Mama didn't know what it was. "Has the corpse been disposed of?" the Empress asked again. "It's been disposed of. The newcomers have all been replaced." Qian Mama replied truthfully. It was normal for one or two palace maids and eunuchs to die in the palace. It wasn't hard to dispose of. Only then did the Empress let out a sigh of relief. She looked at the sky outside and suddenly sank into silence. No matter how Qian Mama looked at the Empress, she felt that it was strange. But when she thought of the Empress's heartache over the loss of her daughter, she felt that it was normal and didn't dare disturb her. At this time, the weather outside was very good. The sun shone brightly and it was close to noon. One day's time. When Han Yunqing heard this agreement, she almost choked on her own saliva. She abruptly stopped and looked at Long Fei Yi with furrowed brows. She seriously asked, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, why do you believe that I can find the truth in one day?" Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi replied, "It's not that this prince believes you. It's just that if you're going to die sooner or later, it's better to die quickly and save this prince trouble." You. Han Yunqing was stifled with anger. She'd taken this guy to be an angel, but now she realized she'd been blind. He was actually a demon. Of course, Han Yunqing had no idea about the gold medallion. No wonder Emperor Tianhui agreed to let a suspect like her participate in the investigation. But Long Fei Yi was right. If she was trapped in the prisons, it'd be hard for her to escape death based on the Empress Dowager's attitude. Long Fei Yi could protect her once, but not 10 times. One day's time was the same as gambling with her life. Seeing Han Yunqing remain silent, Long Fei Yi tilted his head and looked disdainfully at her. "If you regret it, you can go back." Han Yunqing snorted disdainfully, her smile brighter than the sun. "Since this Wang Fei came out, I have no plans to go back. Let's go, take me to the autopsy immediately." After being locked up for 5 days, Han Yunqing's face was pale and bloodless. Her body was sickly weak, but at this moment, her entire being radiated with a threatening radiance under the sunlight. Long Fei Ye's gaze was fixed on her face, not moving away for a long time. "Han Yunqing, this time your lordship has invested heavily. You mustn't disappoint your lordship." At noon, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqing arrived at the Flowing Splendor Palace where Princess Changping's body was. The Empress Dowager, Empress, and Long Tianma had all heard the news and hurried over. It was winter now, and the crystal coffin had preserved the body well. However, the livor mortis had already spread all over the body, revealing signs of poisoning. Although Changping had made things difficult for her and framed her in the past, Han Yunqing still felt uncomfortable seeing such a beautiful life fall. She stood there for a while before saying, "Open the coffin." But the Empress, who'd been glaring at Han Yunqing from her seat, suddenly stood up. "Don't even think about it." After thinking it over, Han Yunqing, who had first-rate poison skills, was still the most suspicious. Moreover, she was the only one who had a grudge with Changping. "Han Yunqing. Aijia hasn't managed to win you over yet, but you've already killed Aijia's most precious granddaughter. Aijia has really misjudged you." The Empress Dowager didn't say anything. The Empress Dowager was lying on the crystal ice coffin. The servants naturally didn't dare to open the coffin. Time passed slowly. The winter afternoons were very short. If this dragged on, the sky would turn dark. Han Yunqing was furious. "Empress, are you going to move aside or not?" The Empress looked at Han Yunqing with resentment, but didn't move. Han Yunqing turned to leave. "Your Highness, please send Qinxia back to the Supreme Court." Who knew that Long Fei Yi would examine the Empress and coldly ask, "Empress, what are you feeling guilty about?" It wasn't just Han Yunqing, but Long Fei as well. With the Empress's usual personality, even if she was grieving, she wouldn't be so unreasonable as to throw a tantrum. She'd even lost the self-restraint of a mother of a nation. Hearing this, the Empress subconsciously let go. "I'm not." "If you're not, then open the coffin and examine the body. It's only half a day, what are you afraid of?" Could it be that you're afraid that Han Yunqing will find evidence? Long Fei Yi continued to interrogate. Long Fei Ye's words surprised the Empress Dowager and Long Tianma. The Empress Dowager immediately slammed the table and stood up. Qin Wang, what do you mean by this? The Empress is grieving over the loss of her daughter. Not only are you not understanding, you're speaking rudely. Aren't you husband and wife going too far? Who knew that Long Fei Yi also slammed the table and stood up? His cold eyes glared at the Empress Dowager as he angrily said, this Wang used the late Emperor's decree of privilege to exchange for this opportunity. What does the Empress mean by obstructing and looking down on the late Emperor's decree of privilege? Decree of privilege? When these words came out, all the servants present immediately knelt down. Heavens, Qin Wang was angry. Qin Wang had even invited the late emperor. The Empress was dumbstruck. She immediately retreated and knelt down with a plop. Qinxia doesn't dare. Qinxia absolutely doesn't dare. The Empress Dowager stood in place and stared blankly at Long Fei Yi. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. If the Empress Dowager remembered correctly, this was the first time she had seen Qin Wang angry. Qin Wang, who had always been cold and indifferent, actually really got angry and brought out the late emperor's decree of privilege. Just for a mere Han Yunqing. A woman who was forced on him. Are you pampering her or being generous? Amidst everyone's shock, Long Fei Yi ordered, someone, open the coffin. At this time, Han Yunqing, who was also in disbelief, slowly turned around. She finally understood why she and Long Fei Yi could smoothly walk out of the Supreme Court. Looking at Long Fei Ye's domineering expression, Han Yunqing's heart madly thumped. This wasn't a dream. Why was this man so good to her? Han Yunqing, what are you still standing there for? Long Fei Yi angrily said. He wasn't good at all. His tone was always unkind and his attitude was always cold. At this time, the crystal ice coffin had already been opened. Han Yunqing quickly came back to her senses. Ignoring the throbbing in her heart, she immediately began to check. On the way here, she had already sorted out her thoughts. Her first step was to find the location of the poison. The location could determine the method of poisoning and the method of poisoning represented the method of poisoning. This was the first step and also the most important step. Han Yunqing approached and activated the scanning system to do a detailed check. If she didn't check carefully, she wouldn't have known. Now that she checked, she found out that on New Year's Eve in the West Wing room, she had missed out on important information in her panic. The location of the poison was on Changping's hand. It was a wound infection type poison. In other words, it wasn't someone who deliberately poisoned her. Changping had a wound on her hand and came into contact with the source of the poison. Han Yunqing was overjoyed. She knew it. The security on New Year's Eve was so tight. How could an assassin have broken in? At that time, she had run over as soon as she heard the sound, but she hadn't seen anyone. Moreover, all the windows in that room had been closed. No one had poisoned her. Princess Changping had been careless and had come into contact with the poison. She hadn't walked a few steps when the poison flared up and knocked over the shelf. That was why she had heard the sound and seen the scene of death. This surprising discovery made the whole thing much simpler. It had to be known that if an assassin had poisoned her, it would be impossible to find the assassin and she would be done for. However, if she had been careless and came into contact with the poison, finding the source of the poison was a piece of cake for Han Yunqing. At this time, everyone's attention was on Han Yunqing. She sneaked a glance at Long Fei Yi. She didn't say anything and continued to do the next step of the examination. Poison sources could be divided into two types. One was natural poison sources, such as plants or animals that were naturally poisonous. The other was artificial poison sources, which were poisons that were artificially extracted. Antiaris upon contact was an extremely rare poison that usually appeared in the southern regions. The number of people who knew about it was even fewer. How could it have appeared in the palace? Filled with doubts, Han Yunqing collected some dried blood clots from the wound on Princess Champing's hand to conduct an analysis. The corpse had been stored for 5 days and the blood clots were already mixed with quite a few impurities. Normal poison masters wouldn't be able to detect them. Fortunately, Han Yunqing had her most considerate friend, the detoxification system, to help her. However, when the results of the analysis came out, Han Yunqing was shocked. She never would have thought that the source of the poison would be like this. This was too inconceivable. Han Yunqing hid the shock in her heart and silently retreated. She took off her gloves and washed her hands. At this time, the room was even more silent. Everyone had clearly seen that Han Yunqing hadn't done anything. She had only used her needles to collect some blood clots. Did this mean that she was done with the autopsy? Did she find anything? Seeing that Han Yunqing's complexion wasn't very good, the Empress Dowager was the first to speak. Han Yunqing, did you find anything? The Empress anxiously looked over, a trace of nervousness flashing through her eyes. Han Yunqing glanced at the Empress Dowager and Empress, but didn't reply. Instead, she turned to Long Fei Yi and said, "Take me to the West Wing Palace." Long Fei Yi didn't ask any more questions. He stood up and left with Han Yunqing, leaving behind a room full of puzzled people. What is this?" the Empress Dowager muttered unhappily. The Empress's eyes flickered with complicated emotions. She didn't reply. Long Tianma said in a low voice, "Imperial Grandmother, let's go take a look together." As Han Yunqing walked into the West Wing Palace, her expression became serious. She looked around, as if searching for something. However, she quickly retracted her gaze and headed straight for the room where Princess Changping had been killed. At this time, Long Fei Yi was curious. He asked in a low voice, "How is it? The source of the poison should be in this palace." Han Yunqing's expression was serious. When she walked out after checking the room, the Empress Dowager and the others had already arrived. Han Yunqing didn't lower her voice, so the Empress Dowager and the others heard her words clearly. The most agitated person was Long Tianma. "Imperial Qin Aunt, what did you say? The source of the poison should still be in the palace. If it's not, then it's too strange." Seeing this, the Empress Dowager was also shocked. Could it be that Han Yunqing had really been wrongly accused? "Then you find it?" the Empress Dowager said coldly. Standing beside her, the Empress suddenly trembled. Long Tianma hurriedly supported her. "Muhu, are you all right?" Han Yunqing glanced at the Empress. She still had an indescribable feeling, but she didn't have time to think about it. "Call Changping's personal servant Shuang Hong over," she said indifferently. "What exactly do you want to do?" The Empress Dowager was anxious. "Don't worry, Empress Dowager. Before nightfall, Changping will definitely be able to rest in peace," Han Yunqing said indifferently. These words made everyone even more certain that she had found something. The Empress Dowager pursed her lips. "All right, Jia will wait." The Empress stared fixedly at Han Yunqing. She didn't even realize that her teeth were tightly clenched and her body was tense. Long Fei Yi stood to the side, calmly stroking his chin as he took in the Empress's reaction. After Princess Changping's death, Shuang Hong fell ill. After a while, 2 palace maids helped her over. As soon as she saw Han Yunqing, Shuang Hong was filled with hatred. Although she knelt, she glared at her. However, Han Yunqing squatted down and asked word by word, "Shuang Hong, on New Year's Eve, when Princess Changping sent you out to get something, what did you take out of this room?" Han Yunqing was very certain that Changping hadn't been poisoned for long. The source of the poison had to be in this room. That night, she had already checked and hadn't found it. Today, she still hadn't found it. Without a doubt, the item had been taken away. As soon as she said this, before Shuanghong could reply, the Empress's legs went soft and she collapsed into Long Tianma's arms. Muhu. Muhu, what's wrong? Long Tianma was shocked. Words for the readers: come, come, come. Move your fingers and add the little poison consort to your collection. While you're at it, click on the recommendation button. Chapter 168. What's wrong, Empress? Han Yunqing stopped her interrogation and looked towards the Empress, but the Empress immediately avoided her gaze. Long Tianma helped the Empress sit down at the side, very concerned. Imperial Mother, are you all right? Are you too tired? Someone, summon the Imperial Physician. The Empress Dowager also spoke. However, the Empress stopped him, her tone firm. I'm fine, there's no need. Han Yunqing was even more confused and questioned Shuanghong again. Shuanghong, think carefully. You can't leave anything out. Shuanghong didn't know why Han Yunqing asked this question. Actually, she didn't need to think too much. That day, when Princess Changping sent her out to get something, she also asked her to take something with her. It was just one thing, and it was a very special thing. She remembered it very clearly. The Empress sat at the side, staring fixedly at Shuanghong. Perhaps because her gaze was too intense, Shuanghong actually sensed the Empress's gaze. She timidly glanced over and was suddenly frightened, immediately retracting her gaze. At this time, Shuanghong felt uneasy. Why was the Empress looking at her like this? Could it be that thing? She was hesitating when Han Yunqing coldly said, Shuanghong, this is a serious matter. Think carefully. If you're lying, once it's discovered. This was a reminder and also a warning. Han Yunqing didn't finish her sentence. Shuanghong lowered her head, her heart pounding. She secretly glanced at the Empress, hesitating. However, at this time, the silent Long Feiyi spoke. It's only been a few days. Do you need to think for so long? When these words came out, Shuanghong abruptly raised her head and met Long Feiyi's icy gaze. She was almost scared out of her wits. Heavens, the Duke of Qin was looking at her and even personally interrogating her. Too frightening. Shuanghong didn't dare to hesitate and hurriedly replied, this servant remembers. That day, Princess Changping had this servant take away a wooden Buddha statue. That belongs to the Empress. This servant left it in the front room and hasn't returned it yet. When these words came out, the Empress seemed to have her soul sucked out of her body and collapsed. It belonged to the Empress? Han Yunqing was shocked. Looking at the Empress's reaction, she seemed to realize something. A complicated look flashed across her eyes. She did not hesitate and said, where did you put it? Take me to see it immediately. It's in the small room next to the door on the right. I haven't touched it since I put it there. Shuanghong answered truthfully. Han Yunqing didn't say anything and strode away. Long Feiyi was the second to follow. The Empress Dowager and Long Tianma became more and more suspicious. What was going on? Han Yunqing is so quiet. What did she find? However, just as the grandmother and granddaughter were puzzled, the Empress, who was sitting on the side, suddenly stood up and quickly chased after them. Mother! Long Tianma shouted. He finally realized that something was wrong with his mother. Although she had been emotionally unstable for the past 5 or 6 days, today was too. What's wrong with her? The Empress Dowager became worried. Long Tianma didn't know what to say for a while. He supported the Empress Dowager and chased after them. However, at this time, Han Yunqing couldn't find anything in the room Shuanghong pointed out. I clearly put it here. I never touched it again. After the incident that day, I fell ill. I never came here again. No one dares to touch the Empress things. That's the Buddha statue that the Empress recently invited. Shuanghong was very excited. She was afraid that she would get into trouble. Han Yunqing and Long Feiyi walked out of the room and saw the Empress standing at the door, staring at them in a daze. Empress, do you know where that Buddha statue went? Han Yunqing asked seriously. I don't know. The Empress immediately replied. So you're saying that it's lost? Han Yunqing asked again. The things here won't be lost. Moreover, it's mother's things. Shuanghong, think about it carefully. Long Tianma walked over. Shuanghong immediately knelt down. Your Highness Crown Prince, this servant didn't remember incorrectly. It was placed in that room. Princess Changping wanted to personally carve a stone Buddha statue for the Empress Dowager as a New Year's gift, but time was short. It was already New Year's Eve and the lotus seat hadn't been carved yet. On New Year's Eve, Princess had this servant borrow a wooden Buddha statue from the Empress to imitate. Afterwards, Princess had this servant go get some gold powder and put the wooden Buddha statue away. This servant put the wooden Buddha statue in this room. Speaking to hear, Shuanghong immediately added, that's right. This servant remembered. That night, this servant told Xiao Yu in the West Wing Palace. She also knew that it was here. Someone, Xian Xiao Yu, come here. Long Feiyi immediately ordered. Xiao Yu. The Empress' face was ashen as she remained silent. However, Xiao Yu didn't come. Instead, it was Qian Momo who came. Reporting to the masters, Palace maid Xiao Yu contracted a terrible disease 2 days ago and is gone. Before she could finish speaking, Han Yunqing suddenly narrowed her eyes. With such a coincidence, if she still couldn't figure out what was going on, then she would have lived in vain. Where's the corpse? Han Yunqing coldly asked. Qian Momo secretly glanced at the Empress and was still calm. The corpse was cremated that day. Han Yunqing sneered and sternly asked, where's that thing? Qian Momo, you're in charge of the West Wing Palace, right? Where's the Empress wooden Buddha statue? Who under you has the guts to steal the Empress Buddha statue? Are they looking to die? This old servant isn't clear. Qian Momo was also scared. She couldn't understand how Qin Wangfei knew to look for that thing. Not clear, not clear. How do you manage things? Han Yunqing pressed. Qian Momo was so scared that her face turned ashen. She didn't know how to answer. Han Yunqing looked at the silent Empress and coldly asked, Your Highness the Empress, don't you know how to look for something that you lost? Hearing Han Yunqing's tone, Long Tianma immediately asked in displeasure, how would Mohu be in the mood to look for something? Imperial Qin Aunt, why are you looking for that thing? Han Yunqing, you're here to investigate the poison. What does it have to do with you that something is missing? The Empress Dowager was also unhappy. The Empress Dowager and Long Tianma naturally saw that there was something fishy about this. However, they couldn't figure out how these two matters were related. Perhaps it wasn't that they couldn't figure it out, but that they were afraid that if they continued to investigate, they would discover something terrifying. After all, at this point, this matter was related to the Empress no matter how they looked at it. Han Yunqing ignored them and coldly stared at the Empress. The Empress tightly gritted her teeth and held on to her last bit of rationality as she met her gaze. However, who knew that Han Yunqing suddenly announced without warning, that wooden Buddha statue is the source of the poison? When this was said, there was an uproar. Even Long Feiyi was shocked. He knew that Han Yunqing looking for the missing Buddha statue must have something to do with the source of the poison. However, he didn't expect the Buddha statue to be the source of the poison. No, it's not. In the silence, the Empress muttered to herself and started to shake her head. However, Han Yunqing continued, Changping had a wound on her hand. The poison she was poisoned with was a natural source. She died because she accidentally touched the source of the poison. There's no such coincidence in the world. The person who purposely hid the Buddha statue must know the truth. In other words, the person who hid the wooden Buddha statue is Changping's murderer. These few words were like a blow to the Empress's head. Finally, the Empress, who was on the verge of collapse, couldn't hold it in anymore and suddenly roared, "I'm not the murderer. I'm not." What? In a split second, everyone was stunned. Why did the Empress say that? Wasn't this just revealing the 300 tales hidden here? So, the Empress was the one who hid the Buddha statue? Just when everyone had yet to regain their senses, the Empress suddenly pounced towards Han Yunqing and screamed loudly, "No! It's not like that. You're the murderer. You're the murderer. You didn't save Changping. You're the murderer." Long Fei Yi reacted quickly and grabbed the Empress's hand and pushed her towards Long Tianma. Who knew that the Empress seemed to have gone crazy? She struggled with all her might and pounced towards Han Yunqing while scolding angrily, "Why didn't you save her? Why? Han Yunqing, aren't you very powerful? Why didn't you save her? Why didn't you go earlier? Why didn't you save her? If you had gone earlier, she wouldn't have died. Woo woo. Han Yunqing, you must have purposely not saved Changping. You're the one who harmed Changping." "It's not me, it's not me." The Empress's reaction was too unexpected. No one expected such a thing to happen. Long Tianma was stunned on the spot. How could this be? It was actually the Empress. Impossible. Even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its cubs. How could the Empress do such a thing? "Han Yunqing, don't slander me." The Empress Dowager was furious. Who would believe this? Although Han Yunqing had her suspicions after asking about the wooden Buddha statue, she was still very shocked when she saw the Empress's reaction. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Only Long Fei Yi was calm. He angrily said, "Qian Mama, where's the thing? Take it out." Qian Mama didn't know that the thing she bought was related to Changping's death. Seeing the Empress's reaction, she was scared out of her wits. Her lips and teeth trembled. Bury it in the back courtyard. This servant doesn't know anything." The Empress, she let this servant bury it in the back courtyard. Qian Mama's words were undoubtedly condemning the Empress's crime. The Empress Dowager retreated several steps until she bumped into the door. She looked at the Empress in disbelief. The Empress was paralyzed at Long Tianma's feet, crying non-stop like a lunatic. Long Fei Yi brought Qian Mama and personally dug up the wooden Buddha statue buried in the back courtyard. He didn't touch it directly. The wooden Buddha statue was wrapped tightly with a piece of cloth. Once he took it, Han Yunqing's detoxification system alerted her. This thing was poisonous. Han Yunqing personally undid the cloth carefully. When she saw the wooden Buddha statue, Han Yunqing suddenly felt like she was going to collapse. Heavens! This thing was poison arrow wood. This was a Buddha statue carved from poison arrow wood. The poison arrow wood's roots and bark were all useful, but they had to be soaked for several days to get rid of the poison. The wooden Buddha statue in front of her wasn't cleaned at all. There was still a small amount of sap hidden in the wood. If one looked carefully, they would see that the bottom of the Buddha statue was slightly moist. This kind of poison had to enter the blood to cause poisoning. Therefore, not everyone would be poisoned if they touched it. However, once there was a wound on their hand, it would definitely be infected and they would die without a doubt. Of course, those who didn't know poison arrow wood were still unable to believe it. Long Tianma couldn't control his own situation and angrily questioned, "What proof do you have that this is the source of the poison?" Han Yunqing didn't answer. Instead, she got someone to bring a live chicken over. When the big rooster was brought over, Han Yunqing personally grabbed it. She cut a small wound on the chicken claw and then brought it close to the base of the Buddha statue. Then, Han Yunqing let go of the rooster. In that moment, everyone looked over. They saw the big rooster walk a few steps and then crash to the ground. Dead. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.